Chapter 111 Angry. The day before, we had to travel over mountains and hills. It affected the next day. With sore backs and legs, everyone was less efficient. Besides, we were going down the mountain. It was not until noon that everyone arrived at the foot of the mountain. Xiao Mingshan led the team to rest on the spot, drink water and eat. Although everyone got along well, and the atmosphere was good, this was an escape after all, not a spring trip. No one knew how many days the weather would be normal, and which natural disasters or man-made disasters would follow. So we ate and drank enough, and continued on the road. Unless it was absolutely necessary, we would not let ourselves fall behind and affect the rest of the team. The only child in the team was Shizha, because he had an abnormality the night before, so Tong Xiangyu was very worried about his condition during the high-intensity journey, and asked him if he was tired. Xiaozhe shook his head, jumping around and looking pretty good, and he had much more energy than the adults. Tong Xiangyu was relieved for once. Before dark, Xiao Mingshan chose a hill with a flat terrain and a wide view to lead the team to camp. The sun was setting. From the high ground, everyone could see that the provincial roads leading out of the city were all destroyed by the meteorites. It was a wise choice to choose to take the mountain road early, otherwise, I don't know how many detours I would have taken, and I would have been wandering on the ground. However, I dare not eat mountain products anymore. It should be the radiation brought by the meteorite, which affected some plant mutations. Luckily, the mushrooms last night were a false alarm. Everyone drank the soup, only one child had a physical problem, and the problem disappeared quickly, but no one knows if they will be so lucky next time, so we should just eliminate it from the root. Xiang Weijun made a fire, and cooked as usual. Song Ge was no slower than Lu Zhou and his team in setting up the tent. After the tent was set up, Zhou Bo and Xiao Mingshan came back, and they checked the safety of the surrounding area and eliminated some possible hidden dangers. Hot rice, with long shelf life bean paste or pickled mustard. Everyone sat around the fire, holding their bowls, and the flames danced on their silent faces. After a day of traveling, everyone was very tired. Xiaozhe even felt a little tired after a few bites. Xiang Weijun sat in an unrestrained manner, with one leg crossed and the other upright, and said while eating, "There is no oil at all, there is no pheasant or rabbit along the way. Even a wild boar will do. Put it on the fire and roast it, and it will smell delicious. Pheasants, rabbits, and wild boars, let alone living animals, there were no birds along the way, and insects were rare." Xiao Mingshan took a piece of fermented bean curd from the bottle and gave it to him. "Eat, braised pork head." Xiang Weijun. Xiao Mingshan, as the captain, was fair, and he also took some fermented bean curd for Zhou Bo and Lu Zhou. "Braised pig's trotters, don't buy pork, eat them all, don't be polite." The two. This scene made the other ladies who were eating quietly laugh, and they followed suit, passing food to each other, and took turns eating barbecue, Japanese food, and French cuisine. Sister Huang saw that Xiaozhe still had half a bowl of rice in his bowl, and he seemed to be picky and had no appetite. She immediately pushed him and said, "Go eat with your sister Yu." Xiaozhe liked to stick to Tong Xiangyu. When he heard this, he quickly went to find Tong Xiangyu with his bowl. Tong Xiangyu saw that Xiaozhe didn't eat much, probably because he was tired from the journey, and tonight's dish was not very appetizing. So she got up and went back to the tent and opened her backpack. As soon as the zipper of the backpack was opened, she saw Bai squatting inside and looking up, with big white eyes, a thin little tongue sticking out, and a small tail wagging excitedly, as if waiting for her to open her bag. Tong Xiangyu gently touched Bai's head with her fingertips, then took out a bag of meat jerky, a can of lychees from her bag, and zipped up her backpack again. It's not that she didn't think about letting Bai out, but when Xiang Weijun and his group of mutants found Bai, they were all very nervous. Not to mention Huang Jie and Xiaozhe. Two ordinary people, even if they could accept it, they would definitely feel uncomfortable and think there was a safety hazard. Tong Xiangyu shared the meat jerky with everyone and gave the can of lychees to Xiaozhe. Xiaozhe hesitated, not knowing whether to take the can. Tong Xiangyu rubbed his little head and said gently, "This is a reward for Xiaozhe. Today's journey was great. Go to bed early after eating, and you will be full of energy tomorrow." Xiaozhe nodded vigorously. Seeing the two of them being so intimate, Song Ge had no good expression, and sat aside with a sullen face. Tong Xiangyu saw Xiaozhe was going to take it, and remembered something, and handed the can to Song Ge beside him. "Song Ge?" "Tong Xiangyu, open it for a moment." "Song Ge." As usual, everyone went to bed early at night. Tonight we stayed in the hills. The wind was stronger than the night before when we slept in front of the main hall. It blew past with a whistling sound. Tong Seongyu was already sleeping soundly in Songgu arms. Not long ago, Songgu accompanied her to watch the stars for a long time outside. The eldest lady couldn't sleep and insisted on watching the stars. After a long night astronomical observation, she shook her little head and said that tomorrow would be a sunny day. Songgu said, "Thank you. If you hadn't said that, I thought it would rain heavily tomorrow." Tong Seongyu was laughing so hard that she was staggering on her body. Songgu watched Tong Seongyu sleeping for a while and was about to go to sleep, but suddenly heard hurried footsteps outside the tent. "Sister Huang, what are you doing?" Zhou Bo asked from outside. Sister Huang did not answer, but soon, Songgu and Tong Seongyu tent was opened by Sister Huang from outside. Sister Huang pushed the already sleeping Tong Seongyu. You. Xiaoja's stomach hurt again. Songgu lifted the child clothes and saw that on the bulging belly, in the same position as last night, there were 7 or 8 small white mushrooms. Sister Huang held Tong Seongyu's hand tightly, as if she was grabbing a life-saving straw. You. Use your special power to save Xiaoja. Tong Seongyu felt a little pain from her grip, but she knew that she was very anxious. So she comforted her. Sister Huang, don't worry. We will find a way. What way? Sister Huang saw that she was shirking, and immediately became anxious, and her voice became louder. Can't you just cut your finger like last night? Songgu's eyes turned cold, and he looked at her. I didn't cut your finger. So you don't feel any pain when you talk while standing? Sister Huang was scolded by Songgu, and her face turned pale instantly. Although Songgu was the same age as Tong Seongyu, Sister Huang always felt that Songgu was difficult to get along with, even though Xiaoja was rescued by him. But the child is in critical condition now. Sister Huang's eyes were red, and she knelt down to Tong Seongyu, holding her hand and crying. You, please save Xiaoja. He is your brother. Tong Seongyu was a little at a loss, and was about to say I would save her. But Songgu grabbed Sister Huang's wrist. Sister Huang felt pain and let go immediately. Songgu looked at her with extremely cold eyes. Brother? How come I didn't know she had a brother here? Whose mother gave birth to him? Sister Huang was shocked by Songgu's cold and scary aura. Her lips moved, but she couldn't speak for a while. Tong Seongyu patted Songgu, comforted her to calm down, and then reached out to her. Songgu looked at Tong Seongyu and frowned. Tong Seongyu communicated with her through her eyes, and with a request. She raised her index finger again, indicating that this was the last time. Really the last time. Songgu looked grim, and pursed his lips, but after a moment, he still took out the knife from his waist, and gave it to her. When Tong Seongyu cut her finger, Songgu stared at her intently, wishing he could carve a hole in the sharp military knife. Tong Seongyu pinched the wound on her finger, and fed the blood into Xiaoja's mouth, thinking that the amount might not be enough last time. So Tong Seongyu endured the pain, and pinched for a little longer. When she was about to withdraw her hand, she was suddenly grabbed by Sister Huang. Sister Huang grabbed Tong Seongyu's hand, squeezed her fingers and squeezed blood, saying, There's still a little bit, isn't there? Don't waste it. Tong Seongyu's face turned pale, half because she was frightened by Sister Huang, and half because she was hurt by her movements. Before Tong Seongyu could say anything, Sister Huang was pushed away by Songgu. Songgu's hand was very strong, and Sister Huang fell to the ground, her eyes still staring at Tong Seongyu's fingers. The wound on Tong Seongyu's fingertips had healed, leaving only a small scab. Sister Huang got up quickly, took the empty canned food bottle that the child had eaten that night. She ran to Tong Seongyu and handed it to her, saying, You. Why don't you cut some blood and leave it with me, so that if Xiaoja gets something, I can give him a drink in time. Tong Seongyu was a little confused. Songgu cursed out loud with a low curse. Fuck. Songgu's eyes were sharp. She looked at the woman whose mind was no longer normal. Are you still talking like a human being? Sister Huang moved her lips, grasped the bottle, her eyes turned red. But only you can save our Xiaoja. You love Xiaoja so much. She must not want to see Xiaoja get into trouble like this. Right? Songgu directly pulled Tong Seongyu, who was about to speak, behind him. Songgu looked at the person in front of him. His eyes were very cold. We have no relationship with you. She is willing to help because she is kind-hearted, but if you dare to use this moral kidnapping to kidnap her, I will tell everyone now that your child has been infected with mutations. When Sister Huang heard this, she turned pale with fear, and hurriedly tried to grab Song's hand. I'm sorry, I was wrong, I shouldn't have said that. I was confused, please don't tell everyone. Songge avoided her touch. Tong Xiangyu pulled Songge's hand at the right time, asking her not to say that to provoke the other party, and then comforted Sister Huang, saying, Sister Huang, don't worry, Songge won't do that. Xiaozhe should be fine for now. You should go to bed early. We will check on Xiaozhe tomorrow. Sister Huang nodded repeatedly and agreed, picked up the sleeping child, lowered her head, and stroked the child's face with care. After noticing that the two had left the tent, Sister Huang's eyes gradually changed. Songge went back to the tent. Tong Xiangyu knew that Songge was angry, so she came close to her and acted like a spoiled child, and deliberately made ugly faces to try to get her to talk. Songge ignored her. Tong Xiangyu had no choice but to pull her sleeve. Songge, please pay attention to me. Songge lay down expressionlessly, lifted the blanket to cover herself. Go to sleep. Tong Xiangyu said oh, and quickly lay down beside Songge, trying to get into her arms, but Songge turned over and deliberately turned his back to her. Tong Xiangyu was also a little angry, and kicked Songge's calf with her cold little feet. Songge dodged, and stopped her from kicking. Tong Xiangyu snorted, and turned around with her back to Songge. But sleeping alone without Songge's embrace was chilly. Tong Xiangyu felt wronged, pursed her lips, and turned back to poke Songge back. Songge. Tong Xiangyu saw that Songge still had his back to her, and she admitted her mistake in a small and aggrieved voice. Songge, I swear there won't be a next time. Songge said coldly, it's useless to swear. I just swore last night. Tong Xiangyu pouted immediately, thinking, is there any use? But Tong Xiangyu quickly said, special cases deserve special treatment. I promise there won't be a next time. I always feel that Xiaozhe is not well this time. Something bad will happen. Songge didn't say anything. Tong Xiangyu knew that Songge was listening, and continued to speak softly, mushrooms are fungi. They can't photosynthesize, and there are only two ways to obtain nutrients, saprophytic or parasitic. Fungi generally do not have any species that can be endoparasitic, so they can only rely on saprophytic growth. Saprophytic growth, as the name implies, absorbs nutrients from the dead bodies of plants and animals and inanimate organic matter. Songge frowned and turned around, and asked in a low voice, are you saying that the child is dead? Tong Xiangyu saw that Songge was willing to pay attention to her, and immediately got into her arms, and then thought about Xiaozhe's behavior throughout the day, and felt that he should not be dead. She shook her head, and looked up at Songge eagerly. Songge, are you not angry with me anymore? Songge looked at her, feeling helpless. Tong Xiangyu said coquettishly, kiss me, and I know you're not angry anymore. Songge looked at Tong Xiangyu crescent-shaped eyes and sighed. Who can really be angry with you? Tong Xiangyu felt sweet in her heart, but she asked knowingly, isn't it you? You were so fierce just now. Her cold feet rubbed against Songge's warm calves again. Songge held her, warmed her feet, and said, I didn't mean to be fierce with you. Then don't be angry with me again. Okay. Will you make me angry? What will I do to make you angry? You don't take care of yourself, and put yourself in danger. Tong Xiangyu thought about it, and nodded seriously. I remember. Then Tong Xiangyu continued to talk about business. Her mood gradually became depressed and heavy, and said, in fact, I don't know what Xiaozhe is like now. Maybe the radiation caused the mushroom to mutate, and become able to parasitize the human body. But being parasitized is not a good thing. Songge, like me. Tong Xiangyu immediately interrupted and corrected unhappily, you are not parasitized. You have a superpower. Being parasitized is like those injured before, one party benefits, the other party suffers, that is called parasitism. Do you understand? Don't talk nonsense in the future. Songge, yes. Tong Xiangyu thought for a while and said, anyway, things will never happen more than 3 times. But before he finished speaking, Songge said coldly, you still want 3 times? Tong Xiangyu changed her words and said, it's just a matter of time. Let's see how Xiaozhe is doing next. Songge looked at Tong Xiangyu for a while, feeling that this little bodhisattva should remember some lessons, so he reached out to hug her back, and lowered his head to kiss her. Tong Xiangyu's eyes brightened up, and she looked at Songge. Songge said, I'm not angry anymore. Tong Xiangyu was so happy that she hugged Songge and rubbed him for a long time, and then pounced on her to continue kissing her. After the sticky kiss was over, Tong Xiangyu half lay on Songge, smelling the reassuring scent on him. She blushed and said softly, "Songge, I know you are worried about me. I will protect myself." Songge hugged her, but his eyes darkened. People are treacherous, and it is not possible to be safe as long as you are on guard. Chapter 112 Missing. It was still dark the next day. Tong Xiangyu turned over in her sleep, but found herself a little empty. She heard some strange noises coming from outside. She opened her eyes. The light in the tent was still dim, but she could see Songge putting on clothes. She listened to the situation outside, and it seemed that someone was crying. Tong Xiangyu sat up immediately. Songge noticed it and said, "It's still early, you continue to sleep, I go out and take a look." Tong Xiangyu would not let Songge act alone, and said she would go and take a look too. Songge had no choice but to wait for Tong Xiangyu to put on her coat. When the two walked out of the tent, everyone was already outside. Xiao Mingshan was bent over, and Xiang Weijun was standing upright with his gun on the side. In the middle of the two people was Huang Jia, who was sitting on the ground and crying breathlessly. One after another, people came out of other tents with flashlights on. Xiao Mingshan advised, "Sister Huang, don't worry, think carefully about when the child disappeared, we will help you find it." Fang Fang rubbed her eyes and asked, "What's wrong?" "Captain Qiao?" Xiang Weijun answered for help. "Xiuzha is missing." When Sister Huang heard this, she cried even more miserably and collapsed. She sat on the ground and cried loudly, beating the ground, and grabbed people's trouser legs to ask for help. Tong Xiangyu was about to go over, but was stopped by Songge. Songge held her back and whispered, "Let's take a look first. There are so many people over there now, it doesn't matter if the two of them go to take care of it." "Lost? That's impossible." Fang Fang guessed. "Did he get up to go to the toilet because he had to pee urgently and didn't tell you?" Qin then pushed up his sunglasses and looked at Sister Huang, who was crying. "Sister Huang, when did Xiaozhi disappear? Wasn't he in the same tent with you? How come you didn't know he was missing?" Sister Huang's hands and feet were shaking, and she was sobbing and panicking. I slept a little late last night. When I woke up, I reached out and found that Xiaozhi was missing, and the sleeping bag felt cold. It seemed that he had been missing for a while." Xiao Mingshan asked Xiang Weijun, who was in charge of night watch during this period. "Didn't you hear anything?" "No." Xiang Weijun said confidently, "There is no movement in the tents. That being said, this hill is not wide enough. The 5 tents are not lined up but staggered." Sister Huang chose the tent in the corner. They arranged one person to keep watch instead of 2 people. Xiang Weijun had to take care of the fire and the surrounding safety. He had to get up and check if there was any movement. If someone really wanted to leave secretly, it was normal that he was not found. But the problem is, a child, in the middle of the night, in the dark, who didn't want to wake anyone up, and was sneaking around, where was he going? Xiao Mingshan comforted the emotionally broken Huang Jie, and said that he would send everyone to help look for him. Tong Xiangyu was standing far away, but she also heard about Xiaozhi's disappearance, and immediately went back to the tent to get a flashlight. Songge followed her into the tent, and whispered, "He was lost suddenly. This is too coincidental." Tong Xiangyu was panicked and anxious at this time. A child suddenly disappeared in the middle of the night. Anyone who heard about it would be nervous, and how could they be as clear-headed and skeptical as Songge? Besides, it was impossible for Sister Huang to act out the look of the sky falling. Tong Xiangyu said worriedly, "Help to look for him first. The nearby mountain roads are difficult to walk on, and the terrain is rugged. If Xiaozhi gets hurt, Sister Huang will definitely not survive. This is a matter of 2 lives, so we must not be careless." Songge and Tong Xiangyu walked out of the tent and saw Xiao Mingshan assembling and arranging the search team. 2 people in a group, everyone searched separately. And he stayed where he was, so that if the child came back, there would be someone to take care of him and exchange information. Tong Xiangyu ran over quickly. "Captain Qiao, Songge and I will help look for it." Xiao Mingshan looked at her and Songge. They were both young girls, and the mountain road was unfamiliar and difficult to walk on. It was not even daybreak yet. "Don't let anything happen to them." Xiao Mingshan was about to object, but Sister Huang on the side objected emotionally. No, I don't want you two to help look for it." Tong Xiangyu was stunned, and looked at Sister Huang. "Sister Huang? I don't want you two to look for it." Sister Huang firmly resisted. But she was not resisting Tong Xiangyu, but Song Ge. Song Ge was so opposed to Tong Xiangyu cutting her blood to save them last night. And he was targeting her everywhere. If Song Ge found Xiuzhe, wouldn't he be killed to silence her? Sister Huang even suspected that Song Ge was the one who lost the child. But she couldn't say this. Once she said it, everyone would get to the bottom of it. By then, it would be impossible to hide the fact that Xiuzhe's body was infected and would still mutate. Captain Xiao and his people would definitely kill her child like they killed those who were parasitized by the vines. Sister Huang thought of this, and raised her hand to wipe her tears in panic, choking and trembling, and said, I will go find it myself. Tong Xiangyu could probably guess why Sister Huang refused, and said then, Sister Huang, I will be in the same group with you. Song Ge saw that the other party became hesitant after hearing what Tong Xiangyu said, and his face suddenly turned cold. Song Ge put his hands in his pockets and said expressionlessly, impossible. Knowing that this woman might have bad intentions and other intentions. How could she let Tong Xiangyu leave her sight and go alone with this person? Sister Huang looked at Song Ge and shrank when she saw Song Ge's gloomy expression. Obviously a little scared. Tong Xiangyu found a compromise. Then I, Song Ge, and Sister Huang will go together. 3 people in a group. Lu Zhou said again, it's better to assign a man to each team. In case of any special and difficult situation, we still have to take action. Xiang Weijun immediately said, I will go with Xiaoyu and Sister Huang. Song Ge, how about you and Lu Zhou? Song Ge's cold eyes swept over Xiang Weijun. Xiang Weijun saw the meaning of her eyes, and couldn't help touching his nose. Tong Xiangyu looked at Song Ge, and then at Xiang Weijun, and felt that this was not the point of the problem at all, and persuaded, don't waste time on this. The temperature outside is so low. It's not dawn yet. And it's a mountain. Everyone should hurry to find the child. I'm with Song Ge and Sister Huang. Qiao Mingshan also said, yes, hurry up and look, everyone carry a flare. Send a signal when you find the child. The group of people were divided into 4 groups, except Song Ge, Tong Xiangyu and Sister Huang. The remaining 3 groups were Qin Nan, Zhou Bo, Xiang Weijun, Zhu Qingwu, Lu Zhou and Fang Fang. Qiao Mingshan stayed where he was, and waited for news. Although it was not bright, Song Ge's ability to see at night was not hindered. It's just that the mountain terrain is very complicated. These mountains and forests are far away from villages and towns. There are few people. The grass and trees grow freely. They will not be cut down. There are weeds and thorns at the feet. The shade of the trees above the head is shady. You can recognize the road during the day, but now it is impossible to recognize it. Besides, Song Ge had to take care of Tong Xiangyu, and also had to be on guard against Sister Huang, which made it even more difficult to move forward. After Sister Huang left the crowd, she no longer cared about the fact that Song Ge and she were not on good terms. She anxiously shouted Xiuzhe's name everywhere, crying and shouting, often tripping without noticing her feet, and embarrassedly asked Tong Xiangyu to help her. The sky gradually brightened, and no one knew about Xiuzhe's situation. Sister Huang had no strength to shout, cried until she was hoarse, and sat on the ground crying loudly, completely devastated. Seeing her reaction, Song Ge finally let go of his suspicion and defense. She didn't look like she was pretending, but they had walked so far and for so long, and the forest was tall, so maybe they didn't see the flares from others. Song Ge suggested going back first, because a child couldn't walk so far in the dark. Tong Xiangyu agreed, and turned to look at Sister Huang, who was crying loudly with her hands covering her face. She sighed heavily, and squatted down to help her. Sister Huang looked very embarrassed. In fact, Song Ge and Tong Xiangyu were not much better. The whole way was covered with dew, and their clothes and trouser legs were all wet. In addition, the weeds above their knees were full of grass seeds, and even had many thorns that scratched their clothes. This was much more embarrassing than their climb up and down the mountain. Just when the 3 of them had to go back the same way, Song Ge suddenly stopped halfway, and turned his head to look in another direction of the dense forest. That was all he could see. But for some reason, Song Ge suddenly saw an unconscious child lying on the hillside, with blood on his face, and the hem of his clothes slightly lifted by the mushrooms growing on his belly. Tong Xiangyu noticed that Song Ge suddenly stopped, and turned around to ask, Song Ge, what's wrong? What are you looking at? Song Ge pulled herself out of the picture and looked again. It was just a wild forest. There was no child, and there was no sign of anyone walking in the weeds on the ground. Tong Xiangyu knew Song-Gu's state very well, and immediately asked, "Is there anything going on over there?" Song-Gu could have answered no based on what she saw, but she was still confused about the scene just now, and she said, "I'm not sure," with just one sentence. Tong Xiangyu said, "Then let's go and have a look. Since no one has called them to look for them, the child is probably not found. They are just going to take a look on the way. If they don't find it, they will come back." After walking in that direction for about 2 or 3 minutes, Tong Xiangyu suddenly smelled a faint fragrance in the air. She moved her nose gently and looked around, but she didn't see any flowers. Just as Tong Xiangyu was about to ask Song-Gu if he smelled it, she saw a 40 to 50 degree hillside in front of her. The hillside was covered with dark green thorns. The thorns on the hillside had traces of being crushed and rolled. There were a few small white flowers blooming in the thorns. A little boy in white clothes and jeans was lying on the thorn bush, on his back, with many scratches on his pale face. Sister Huang collapsed when she saw this, crying out in a shrill voice, "Xiaozhe!" Then she rushed to save the child. Tong Xiangyu almost couldn't stop him. She hugged him desperately to stop him. Sister Huang, calm down. How are you going down?" The slope was so steep, covered with thorns, there was not even a way to go down. With Sister Huang's physical and mental state, she went down, and she and Song-Gu had to come up to save them. But it was indeed Xiaozhe, who seemed to be alive, with his small chest still rising and falling. But he didn't respond no matter how she called him. So he must have fainted. Tong Xiangyu advised Sister Huang, "Sister Huang, calm down. It's a good thing that the child has been found now. I will send out a signal flare to let everyone know." Seeing that Sister Huang seemed to have calmed down, Tong Xiangyu took out the signal flare from her mouth. But she studied it for a while, and found that it was useless. So she asked Song-Gu, "Song-Gu, how do you use this?" "Song-Gu, I do it. There are several types of flares, and theirs is the simplest and most convenient. One flare can be released multiple times. Just pull the fuse, the flare will fly to the sky and emit a bright red light and huge smoke, which will last for about half a minute before disappearing." Song-Gu taught Tong Xiangyu how to use it, and then released one on the spot. She said, "Pay attention to the surrounding environment, and don't let the flare be blocked by the branches of the trees." The flare was successfully launched. Tong Xiangyu looked up, but she saw Sister Huang running to the side, grabbing the thorny vines on the ground, trying to climb down. It is too difficult for a mother to watch her child suffer, and wait for help that may not come at any time. Tong Xiangyu hurried over to pull Huang Jie, but she ran too fast and almost fell down. Song-Gu held Tong Xiangyu firmly, put the unfired flares into Tong Xiangyu pocket, and said, "You stand here. I go." Song-Gu directly picked up Huang Jie, and then went down himself. Song-Gu borrowed strength from various branches, vines and bushes, tested the strength with his feet, and moved down the slope little by little. Tong Xiangyu led Huang Jie away from the slope, but her eyes never left Song-Gu. She nervously shouted, "Song-Gu, be careful. Slow down. Don't rush." At this time, she had no time to think about why the child would run to such a place in the middle of the night. She just hoped that Song-Gu could rescue the child safely. Huang Jie also waited anxiously. She bit her fingers, stared at the child in the thorn bush with tearful eyes, and her whole body was trembling slightly. Song-Gu moved down steadily, bit by bit, with each step being firm. The actual slope of the hillside was not as steep as imagined, but the thorns were very big, like roses, and would occasionally tear clothes and pants, and cut flesh. Suddenly, Song-Gu stopped. Song-Gu smelled a fragrance in the wind, very faint, but strange, giving her a feeling as if she had instantly sucked into her blood. That feeling was very bad. Song-Gu immediately held her breath, frowned, and looked at the child lying in the thorn bush again. The child was lying with blood on his face, just like the scene she had inexplicably seen before. His clothes and pants were covered with thorns, which had obviously rolled down, and the hem of his clothes was slightly lifted by white mushrooms. Tong Xiangyu blood couldn't cure this child. Song-Gu was thinking deeply. A gust of wind blew, and the child white hem was lifted. The white mushrooms that were sticking up his clothes fell off automatically. There was no wound on his belly, and he looked very normal. In this short period of time, Song-Gu heard the child originally weak breathing become obviously strong, as if he had regained vitality in an instant, even though he had been unconscious for several hours. So, was it the effect of Tong Xiangyu blood? Or was there such a shedding cycle? If it was a process, then of course it would be the best. But if it was the former, this child would inevitably become a moral burden that would drag down Tong Xiangyu. The little bodhisattva said that things would never happen more than 3 times. And things would never happen more than 2 times. But she knew very well that if others really came to her for help, it would be impossible for her to refuse. This will surely bring them more and more danger and trouble. Tong Xiangyu kept an eye on Song Ge's movements. Seeing her stop halfway up the hill, she panicked and asked nervously, "Song Ge, what's wrong?" Song Ge's mind turned several times in an instant. When she heard Tong Xiangyu shouting from above, she came to her senses and decided to take the child back first. She was not going to go down again, but held her breath, holding the vine in one hand and the child arm with the other. However, just as he grabbed the child, Song Ge's eyes went dark, and he fell straight down without any warning. Seeing this, Tong Xiangyu was so frightened that her heart stopped beating. She let go of Sister Huang, who had been holding her tightly, and rushed down the mountain. Song Ge. At the moment Song Ge fainted, several thin vines flew out of his right hand quickly, and Shua fixed them tightly on the soil and tree trunks, preventing Song Ge from rolling down the mountain after fainting. Seeing this, Tong Xiangyu's heart stopped beating again. But it seemed that the vines could not hold on for long, and soon showed signs of loosening a little. Sister Huang's eyes were swollen from crying. She didn't see the scene clearly. She only saw Song Ge fall, and the thorn bush moved. Xiaozhe, who was very light, rolled down. She screamed and wanted to run down to save the child. Tong Xiangyu suddenly calmed down. She pushed the person back and said, "Sister Huang, you stay here. I go down." A gust of wind blew over, and Tong Xiangyu felt that the faint fragrance was a little stronger. There must be something wrong with the flower in the thorn bush. Tong Xiangyu pursed her lips. She had the ability to heal herself, so she should be immune for a period of time. Just like before at the zoo's base. She was also drugged, and she woke up much earlier than Song Ge, who was fed drugs. Despite this, Tong Xiangyu still took out the handkerchief in her pocket to plug her nose, and gave it to Sister Huang to plug it as well. Then she climbed down the mountain carefully and quickly. Chapter 113 Evil Intentions. The wild thorns were very prickly, and Tong Xiangyu felt very painful, but she didn't care for a moment, and quickly came to the side of the fainted Song Ge. The vines noticed her, and immediately reached out to her with grievance, and found that she was bleeding, and then anxiously and distressfully touched her palm clumsily. Tong Xiangyu found that she could feel its mood, which was very strange. After all, it was just a mutated plant. She touched the vines, as if to comfort it, and then went to see Song Ge's condition. Song Ge's breathing sounded very even, and she should have lost consciousness and fainted. The blood from the thorns on Tong Xiangyu's hand stopped quickly. The vines that were gradually losing their strength seemed to have gathered all their strength again, and helped Tong Xiangyu a lot when she rescued Song Ge. Otherwise, with Tong Xiangyu's strength, she would probably be unable to rescue Song Ge. Sister Huang cried anxiously, "Xiaozhe, please save our Xiaozhe." Tong Xiangyu, "Right away, Sister Huang. Don't worry." Tong Xiangyu must have rescued Song Ge first, and put him in a safe place. The vine suddenly lost its strength when it was about to reach the top. Tong Xiangyu struggled to hold Song Ge alone. Fortunately, Song Ge was not that heavy. She moved him up little by little. Huang Jie responded and pulled hard, and Song Ge went up. Huang Jie urged Tong Xiangyu again, "Hurry up. Our Xiaozhe." Tong Xiangyu was exhausted. She looked at Song Ge worriedly, took a breath, and went down again to save Xiaozhe. After all, the child was light. Tong Xiangyu quickly carried Xiaozhe away from the thorn bush, and returned to the top of the hillside. After going up and down several times, Tong Xiangyu's coat and pants were torn, and there were many small wounds on her hands and ankles. Although the wounds had healed, there were still bloodstains, and some thorns were half pierced in the flesh, which hurt when she moved. This was not the time to find faults. Tong Xiangyu handed Xiaozhe to Sister Huang, and immediately went to see Song Ge's condition. "Xiaozhe, Xiaozhe." Sister Huang took the child and cried with joy. She put her hands on his little face, felt the warmth, and then checked his little hands and feet. After confirming that he was not seriously injured, she lifted his clothes to see that the white mushrooms that had grown had also fallen off. Sister Huang heaved a sigh of relief. A gust of wind blew by, and the smell of gunpowder from the flare remained in the wind. They had walked a long way, and it would take a long time for Chiao Meishan and the others to see the flare and rush over. Sister Huang held her child, and her eyes unconsciously turned to Tong Xiangyu, who was saving people. The surroundings suddenly became very quiet. There was only the rustling sound of the wind blowing through the weeds and leaves. Tong Xiangyu was unaware of it. She saw that Song Ge was unconscious, and the vines had disappeared, and she took out the military knife from Song Ge's waist, and wanted to cut a hole in her arm to let the blood out. Suddenly, there was a dull pain. She froze and looked back in disbelief. In her sight, Sister Huang had a ferocious and crazy expression on her face. She raised a huge rock with both hands and smashed it down again. Tong Xiangyu fell to the ground. Huang knocked Tong Xiangyu unconscious. She immediately dropped the big rock in her hand and went forward to check. She first tested Tong Xiangyu's breath. She was not dead. She didn't want to waste it. She used her hands to pick up the blood flowing from Tong Xiangyu's head and fed it to the child. She found that it was inconvenient, so she simply lowered her head to lick it herself. Anyway, this blood is a good thing. She looked completely crazy. After the wound on Tong Xiangyu's head stopped bleeding, Sister Huang turned her head sharply. Song Ge was still lying on the ground unconscious. This is the man. This man will definitely ruin her business. Sister Huang dragged Song Ge's legs and looked down the hillside covered with thorns. She pushed Song Ge down and watched Song Ge roll down the hillside until he could no longer be seen. Sister Huang took a deep breath and turned to deal with Tong Xiangyu. Of course, Tong Xiangyu couldn't be killed. She had to feed her and drink her blood so that she and her child could live. She didn't care about the shelter. As long as the child mutated, he would be ruthlessly killed. She would rather stay on this mountain and raise her little Joelle. Sister Huang remembered that on the way here, she had seen a cave covered by lush vegetation. The cave was hidden, and the road was difficult to walk. Song Ge said that the child would never go there, so they didn't go to see it. Now, she could hide Tong Xiangyu in the cave first. Sister Huang turned around and saw that her child had woken up. She ran over in surprise. Xiaozhe, you're awake. She didn't know how horrible and hideous she looked now, because she had just drunk blood not long ago, and her mouth and face were covered with coagulated blood. She looked like a demon who could eat people. Xiaozhe witnessed her pushing Song Ge down, and then saw her face covered in blood. He shrank back in fear. Don't come over here. Don't come over here. But how could he hide at such a young age? Sister Huang hugged him, patted his back and comforted him. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Mom is here. Mom will protect you. Xiaozhe struggled hard, but couldn't get away. He cried and called Tong Xiangyu, who was lying on the ground beside him. Sister Tong Tong. Sister Tong Tong. Sister Huang was so scared that she quickly covered his mouth and nose, and scolded, What are you shouting for? Don't shout. Don't shout. Sister Huang stared at her son with a pair of bloodshot eyes like a beast, and was full of hatred and exasperation. I let you run around. Nothing happened. Who do you think I am doing this for? It's all for you. If you turn into a monster, they will kill you. What should Mom do? Xiaozhe's mouth and nose were tightly covered, and he couldn't breathe. His little face turned purple. He kept struggling, but he didn't have the strength to fight against an adult. The sound of his kicking feet became smaller and smaller. Sister Huang was unaware of it, and she reasoned with him viciously. I said I just let her cut a little blood for you. Cut a little bit. The blood will keep growing, and when a person dies, he is gone. They watched her die without helping her. Can you blame Mom for being cruel? Mom said she would not kill Sister Tong Tong. I promise. Didn't I promise you that? It turned out that Xiaozhe had mushrooms growing in his stomach for 2 consecutive days and was in great pain. He was unconscious, but he was actually conscious. After waking up last night, he whispered, Mom, have I become a monster? Of course not. Sister Huang was distressed. She hugged him with tears in her eyes and tried to comfort him. Our Xiaozhe is Mom's little baby. How could he become a monster? Don't worry. Sister Tong Tong will definitely save you. She loves you so much. But I don't want to drink Sister Tong Tong blood. Xiaozhe said, Sister Tong Tong is very afraid of pain. I don't want to drink her blood, and I don't want to be hated by her. He cried aggrievedly. Sister Huang hugged him tightly and comforted him. Silly child. How could Sister Tong Tong hate you? The blood will grow back continuously, and the life will be gone. This is their special ability. And of course they will use it to save people. They won't be so selfish. And this is what they should do. Besides, it's just a cut on the finger. It will heal soon. How can it hurt? So Sister Tong Tong won't hate you. Understand? Xiaozhi didn't know. He cried and struggled. I don't want it. I just don't want to drink. Sister Huang quickly covered his mouth tightly and said anxiously, Don't cry. Xiaozhi, don't cry. Mom is doing this for your own good. Do you know what will happen if you become a monster? They will kill you. And then kill Mom too. Xiaozhi's tears slowly stopped. Seeing that he understood, Sister Huang let go of his hand and comforted him again, saying, Don't worry. Mom has a way. Xiaozhi will not become a little monster. Even if Sister Tong Tong refuses to save you, Mom has a way. You will get better. Believe in Mom. Okay? Xiaozhi nodded, but ran out alone after she fell asleep. He turned into a monster. He didn't want his mother to be killed. And he didn't want Sister Tong Tong to be hurt. He could live alone. So he quietly hid from Uncle Lu Zhou and didn't let him see him. Then he ran very far in the dark. He was small, but could run far. But his stomach suddenly hurt so much. He lifted his clothes and saw those little mushrooms. He quickened his pace and ran. He didn't know how long he ran. He tripped and fell many times. He felt that he was dying of pain. When he woke up, he saw that his mother had just pushed Sister Songge down the hillside. And Sister Tong Tong also fell to the ground with blood all over her head. Don't do this. Xiaozhi wanted to call his mother, but his vision became increasingly blurred, and his kicking feet slowly stopped, and he could no longer kick. Sister Huang saw that her son finally understood her painstaking efforts and stopped struggling and calling, but had just fallen asleep temporarily. So she hurriedly ran to take the military knife from the unconscious Tong Xiangyu and went to the hillside to cut grass vines. When cutting grass vines, she did not forget to take a look down to make sure that Songge had completely rolled down and could not be seen, and then she climbed up again with confidence. After tying the child to her back with vines, Sister Huang half dragged and half carried the unconscious Tong Xiangyu. Tong Xiangyu was at least 90 pounds. So Sister Huang dragged her with great effort. But she never stopped for a moment. Finally, she dragged her into the hidden cave. The cave was damp and cold. And dark. Sister Huang untied the vines and put the child down. Then she tied Tong Xiangyu to the stone in the cave with vines, and cut a piece of cloth and stuffed it into Tong Xiangyu's mouth to prevent her from shouting when she woke up. After doing all this, Sister Huang sat on the ground and rested well. This was not enough. She had to go back and bring down some supplies and various items. Sister Huang washed her bloody hands with cold and dirty water in the cave, and then washed her face. The more she washed, the calmer Sister Huang became. Just in case, she also tied the sleeping child to the rock, and then whispered and comforted him, Xiaozhi, wait for your mother here first. Your mother will be back soon. Don't be afraid. Don't run around. And be obedient. When they walked out of the cave, the morning light faded, and it was already daybreak. After seeing the signal flare, several groups of people gathered in the same direction without any prior agreement. The distance was far, and everyone could only judge the approximate direction based on the light and smoke of the signal flare. Zhou Bo was different. He determined the specific direction as soon as he saw the signal flare, and took Qin Nan there. On the way, he happened to meet Zhu Qinggu and Xiang Weijun who were going there. So the four of them went together. However, the search area was large. The distance was too far, and the terrain was complicated, and they had to cross mountains and ridges. When they got there, it was already daybreak. No one, seeing that the place where the flares were fired was approaching. Zhu Qingwu used his special powers and heard no movement around. Zhu Qingwu said, This is the direction where Songge and Xiaoyu are searching. Is it possible that they have taken Xiaozhi back first? Impossible. If they had gone back, the captain would have fired the flares long ago. Zhou Bo said, Let's take a closer look around. It should be nearby. Everyone went down the mountain. Suddenly, a faint smell came from the air. Qin Nan frowned. As a doctor, she almost instantly recognized what the smell was. She looked in the direction of the dense forest. It smells bloody. Zhou Bo immediately asked in surprise, Are they injured? Everyone rushed into the dense forest and searched separately. If they were injured, it would be normal if there was no movement. However, after a while, Qin Nan asked from afar, Do you smell any fragrance? Zhu Qingwu immediately replied, Fragrance? Didn't you say the smell of blood? Qin Nan was very sure. The fragrance of flowers. and the smell of blood. "Come and see, there is something here," he shouted to the guards, and he found a large blood-stained stone, and a slope, which was covered with thorns, but the thorns were obviously pressed, and the soil on the side was loose and there were signs of crawling. Someone fell down. Xiang Weijun immediately said, "I go down and take a look." On the other side, Lu Zhou and Fang Fang returned to the hill where they camped. They looked for the direction of the search and rescue, but didn't see any signal flares at all, but when they saw that it was already bright, they searched fruitlessly, guessing that someone else might have found the result, so they returned to the hill first. Only Qiao Mingshan was left alone in the camp. Lu Zhou immediately asked, "Captain Qiao, have they not returned yet?" Qiao Mingshan glanced at his watch. "I saw a signal flare in the northwest 39 minutes ago. I guess they are all heading that way. You guys take a break, I go to meet them." He was waiting for someone to hand over, in case someone came back. There would be no one in the camp to pick them up. Fang Fang heaved a sigh of relief when she heard that. "It's okay if I find it. I changed my clothes." She was exhausted, and her pants and clothes were all wet by the morning dew, which made her feel very uncomfortable. She went into the tent after she finished speaking. Qiao Mingshan went down the mountain in the direction of the smoke bomb to pick them up. Fang Fang was changing her clothes when she heard Lu Zhou walk outside the tent and say, "Xiao Fang, take a rest. I go with Captain Qiao to pick everyone up." Fang Fang asked, "Don't you want to take a break?" Lu Zhou, "No. I'm not tired." When Fang Fang left the tent, Lu Zhou was no longer there. She sighed, and went back to the tent to lie down on her sleeping bag. "My legs felt as heavy as if they were filled with lead. And my eyelids were heavy. I was so sleepy. I searched from midnight until dawn." At this time, Sister Huang was coming to the camp on the mountain. Chapter 114 Success. Sister Huang did not go back the same way. She knew that Song Ge had set a signal flare, and everyone must be on their way. She wished that everyone would come. In this way, there would be no one stationed in the camp, and she only needed to avoid everyone, and she could move all the supplies she wanted down the mountain. But she couldn't take everything away. First, her strength was limited, and second, if she took everything away, Qiao Mingshan and the others would definitely not stop after they found out, and they might even search the mountain, so her hiding place would be exposed sooner or later. The wind blew past my ears, and cold sweat blew on my back. Sister Huang couldn't help but feel annoyed. She was too hasty at that time. She should have created the illusion that all the people fell off the cliff, so that everyone would think they were dead and leave. Unlike now, they couldn't find anyone, and they might stay on this mountain. Sister Huang thought about it while going to another direction to climb the mountain, because there was a Zhu Qingwu in the team who had the ability of hearing. She had to go a long way to climb the mountain. Along the way, Sister Huang made a lot of plans in her mind and thought of a lot of arguments. As the cold sweat was dried by the wind, she became calmer. However, when they finally returned to the hill camp, they found that there was no one there. Not even the team leader Qiao Mingshan. Did they all go to look for them? That would be the best. Sister Huang didn't waste time, and didn't make any noise. She immediately ran into her tent, packed her clothes, picked up her backpack, and ran to Song Ge and Tong Xiangyu tent. Song Ge and Tong Xiangyu tent was closed. Sister Huang unzipped it, and saw two backpacks neatly placed next to the sleeping bag. Sister Huang knew that the two of them had more supplies than everyone else. When she opened the bag, she saw that there was everything. She didn't choose, and just took both bags. At this time, there was a zipper sound outside, and a somewhat confused question. "Is anyone there?" Fang Fang slept for a while, and heard footsteps in a half-awake state. She thought someone had come back, and opened the tent to look around, but there was no one. In the tent, Sister Huang was stiff and tense, and she dared not move. Fang Fang, who saw no one, said to herself, "Strange, am I dreaming? Is it hallucination?" Then she raised her hand and yawned, and went back to sleep in the tent. When Sister Huang and others were completely silent, she tiptoed out of the tent, and then ran away quickly without any hesitation. On the other side, Xiang Weijun was grabbing the thorny vines, and was going down the hillside to look for someone, but Zhou Bo immediately took out a long rope from his backpack and threw it to him, and tied the other end to a tree. Xiang Weijun originally thought it was unnecessary, but the rope had already been thrown down, so he just tied it around his waist. Seeing that he had taken the safety measures, Zhou Bo asked Qin Nan beside him, "How is it?" "It is human blood for sure." Qin Nan sniffed the blood on the stone, and touched it with his hand. It looks like the color has only been there for a short time. At most 1 or 2 hours. Is that when the flare was launched? Zhu Qingwu immediately asked. What happened? Zhou Bo's heart sank, remembering what he saw when he was on duty last night. But he was not sure whether he was just speculating. Zhu Qingwu saw that he had something to say. What do you want to say? Zhou Bo said directly. Last night, I saw Sister Huang looking for Songge and Xiaoyu. Zhu Qingwu, why did you look for them? I don't know. I called Sister Huang at that time. But Sister Huang ignored me. Zhou Bo thought and guessed. Sister Huang looked a little flustered at that time. Maybe Xiaoxia had an accident again. Zhu Qingwu, you mean he has mushrooms in his stomach again? But if he has mushrooms, what's the point of looking for Songge and others? Zhou Bo said, have you forgotten that Sister Huang refused to say anything the night before yesterday? And just kept crying? Did she only tell him after Songge and the others came? And after Songge and Tong Xiangyu came out, the mushrooms on Xiaoxia's stomach fell off automatically the next day. How could he recover so quickly after being infected? It must be Tong Xiangyu and the others who did something. Zhu Qingwu didn't understand. What did they do? Zhou Bo, have you forgotten their abilities? After Songge was injured by the mutant vines, they gradually learned from Captain Qiao and Wei Jun that Songge and Tong Xiangyu both had abilities, which were self-healing. This is why all the other infected people died and mutated. But only Songge could wake up and act like nothing happened. Zhou Bo guessed they should still be hiding something. For example, the supernatural power is not only self-healing, but also can heal others. Zhu Qingwu listened to Zhou Bo's words, and suddenly understood the cause and effect. He looked at the blood-stained stone in Qin Nan's hand in shock. You mean, Sister Huang attacked them both? Zhou Bo actually thought so in his heart. But when he heard Zhu Qingwu say it, he felt something was wrong. He said, but according to Xiaoyu's personality, there is no need for Sister Huang to attack. She will definitely volunteer to help. Zhu Qingwu thought the same. Yu is a very kind child. But then she changed her mind and said, but Songge is different. Zhou Bo's eyes widened, and he immediately took over the conversation. Yes. This is the wrong part. Sister Huang may be able to deal with Xiaoyu, but Songge is skilled. And quite skilled. Sister Huang will definitely not be able to deal with her. As soon as the voice fell, Qin Nan immediately pushed down his sunglasses on the bridge of his nose. Look at Wei Jun. What is he doing? Zhou Bo and Zhu Qingwu immediately looked at Xiang Wei Jun at the bottom of the hill. Xiang Wei Jun had a safety rope tied around his waist, holding a thorny vine in his hand, and rappelling while looking down. However, a strange fragrance suddenly came, and before he could react, his hand loosened and he fell directly on the hillside. Qin Nan saw the scene of Xiang Wei Jun rolling into the thorn bush. Zhou Bo's heart trembled, and he immediately grabbed the rope to pull Xiang Wei Jun up. He tested his breath and found that Xiang Wei Jun fell into a coma. Zhou Bo patted his face and took a drug spray to stimulate him. But he didn't wake up. Zhu Qingwu looked at Xiang Wei Jun, who was unconscious, pursed his lips and said, now it makes sense. Zhou Bo and Qin Nan looked at Zhu Qingwu, and they looked at each other. Their hearts sank. Songge might have fallen into a coma. First, the main deputy. Did Sister Huang bring people here on purpose? First get rid of Songge, and then attack Tong Xiangyu? Zhou Bo carried Xiang Wei Jun on his back and said, not necessarily. Songge has supernatural powers, and he may not be affected by this incense. Let's go back first and discuss it with the captain and others. On the way back, several people ran into Lu Zhou and Qiao Mingshan, who came to meet them. Qiao Mingshan saw Zhou Bo carrying Xiang Wei Jun on his back. What's going on? What happened to Jun? He swept his eyes over the group of people and asked, where are Songge and the others? There were drops of cold water falling. Tong Xiangyu's eyelids moved, and the pain from the back of her head made it difficult for her to open her eyes. But it was this pain that gave her enough sense of reality. The surroundings were cold and damp. Tong Xiangyu opened her eyes, and the image of Sister Huang holding a stone in her hand flashed through her mind. Tong Xiangyu suddenly widened her eyes and looked around. However, the violent movement made her feel uncomfortable and dizzy. Songge. Tong Xiangyu instinctively wanted to call for help, but she found that her mouth was completely stuffed and she couldn't make any sound. She moved her body and found that she was also tied to an uneven boulder. Cold, dark, and silent. Tong Xiangyu struggled again, but the vines were tough. Although she struggled hard, her wrists were rubbed and bleeding. She couldn't get free. Tong Xiangyu was anxious. But she stopped struggling. She adjusted her breathing and tried to adapt to the dim light of the surrounding environment. Not long after, she finally saw something. On a stone not far away, there was a person tied up with vines. Is it Song-ge? Tong Xiangyu was surprised. And the next moment she sank to the bottom. The body was not Song-ge, but a child. Where is Song-ge? Where did the madman put the unconscious Song-ge? Tong Xiangyu continued to look around anxiously. But in the dim light, she could see that there was not much space in this place. As far as she could see, there was no Song-ge at all. Tong Xiangyu struggled again, but couldn't get free. The thorn that had half pierced her hand hurt. Tong Xiangyu breathing began to quicken, and tears flowed unconsciously. She closed her eyes and shed tears, thinking that it was just a nightmare. She and Song-ge had never gone down the mountain with Sister Huang to find Xiaozhe. That's not the case. Cold water dripped from the top of the cliff, falling on the water-filled ground. Tong Xiangyu looked at it and felt a tearing pain in her chest. Song-ge. No. I have to calm down. Stay calm. That crazy Huang Jia only targeted her. She would not do anything to Song-ge. Even though she thought so, Tong Xiangyu could not stop crying. Just then, Tong Xiangyu suddenly heard a noise coming from outside. Huang Jia ran down the mountain very fast, as if there was a ghost chasing her. She fell several times along the way, but she did not feel any pain at all. Finally, she returned to the cave. She immediately moved away the bushes and vines that were used as cover outside the cave, and covered the things again after entering the cave. The cave was dark. Sister Huang took out a flashlight and turned it on. As soon as she shone it, she saw Tong Xiangyu with red eyes. Sister Huang was so scared that her whole body jumped. She immediately patted her chest and put down the 3 backpacks. Tong Xiangyu was almost going crazy. She wanted to ask Sister Huang where Song-ge was. But she saw Sister Huang took her backpack. There was bye-bye in her bag. Tong Xiangyu was suddenly happy. But she didn't want to show any clues. Instead, she forced herself to calm down. She closed her eyes and opened them again. Sister Huang immediately untied her son because the vines were tied tightly and the cave was cold. So the child felt cold to the touch. Sister Huang held the child in her arms for a long time, touching him. Xiaozhe. Xiaozhe. Mom is back. However, under the light of the flashlight, Tong Xiangyu saw that Xiaozhe in Sister Huang's arms had turned blue and purple. Chapter 115. It's over. Tong Xiangyu felt a chill down her spine, but seeing Sister Huang's expression, she seemed to have noticed nothing wrong at all, and she kept stroking the purple face with a smile. Is this crazy? Tong Xiangyu panicked, but forced herself to stay calm. No, she couldn't alert the enemy. No matter if this person was really crazy or not, she had to find out where Song-ge was first. Sister Huang had stroked her son enough, and reached out to take Tong Xiangyu backpack. When Tong Xiangyu saw Sister Huang taking her bag, her pupils slightly dilated, and she immediately held her breath. However, nothing happened. Bye-bye, who always stayed in the bag, disappeared. Sister Huang took out the blanket from the bag and spread it on the ground. The cave was damp and cold, and only with the blanket could the child sleep. After settling the child, Sister Huang took out an empty can from her bag, which was the can of lychees that Xiaozhe had eaten last night. Sister Huang held the can in one hand and the military knife in the other, and smiled at Tong Xiangyu and said, "Don't be afraid, Xiaoyu. I will only cut your blood a little, and I won't hurt you." Tong Xiangyu's mouth was blocked, and she couldn't speak. She just felt her scalp tingling when she saw the smile on Sister Huang's face. This lunatic had already attacked her with a rock, but he still had the nerve to say, "I won't hurt you." Looking at the big empty can, Tong Xiangyu tried to shrink back, but behind her was the cold and hard rock, and she had nowhere to retreat. Tong Xiangyu resisted with a grunt. Sister Huang squatted in front of her, as if she was talking about the weather, and her tone was normal. "Look, if you had cut a little more blood for me last night, nothing would have happened. My son won't run around, and you don't have to suffer this." Sister Huang seemed to remember something when she said this and said, "And Song-ge, I don't have to push her down the mountain with all my strength." Push down the mountain? Tong Xiangyu's brain seemed to be blank for a moment. Her pupils trembled suddenly, and she struggled hard in an instant. Her tears burst out, and she cried and screamed at Sister Huang. Sister Huang looked at her. Sister Huang took the empty can under Tong Xiangyu's hand, and then took her hand, and directly cut a deep wound on all 5 fingers with a knife. The fingers immediately bled. Sister Huang quickly stuffed her fingertips into the mouth of the can. Soon, the bloody and sticky blood accumulated at the bottom of the bottle. Sister Huang was satisfied, and then looked at Tong Xiangyu, and said with a smile, "Don't blame me. You two have such a good relationship. If you let her live, she will definitely turn this mountain over to find you." Tong Xiangyu shook her head frantically and collapsed. She couldn't stop crying. She could comfort herself just now, but now Sister Huang's words hurt a million times more than having her heart cut open by her fingers. She still didn't want to believe it, and she cried while shaking her head and struggling. Seeing her so excited, Sister Huang reached out to wipe her tears very considerately, and comforted her by saying, "Don't be afraid. You are different from her. Be obedient. I won't kill you. I will feed you well." Tong Xiangyu remembered how merciless she was when she hit her, and then remembered how Songge was pushed down the mountain in a coma. She felt extremely painful and desperate, and her eyes went dark, and she fainted. Sister Huang raised her hand to feel her breath, and she was not dead. So she continued to squeeze blood, not hurriedly, and when the wound on Tong Xiangyu's finger healed, she immediately cut 2 more lines to make the blood flow faster. When the can was half full, Tong Xiangyu's face had turned visibly pale. Huang knew she couldn't rush, so she collected the blood for the time being, then walked to her son, picked him up, and said, "Xiaozhe, take the medicine." Xiaozhe didn't move. Huang then pinched his mouth open, asked him to look up, and slowly poured the blood in a can into his mouth, saying, "It's not very tasty, but you have to bear with it for a while, and you feel better after you finish drinking it." A ray of sunlight passed through the grass, vines and bushes at the entrance of the cave, and fell in patches in the cave. Tong Xiangyu woke up from a brief coma, and saw Xiaozhe's head leaning back weakly, and there were obvious finger marks on his small neck. Xiaozhe did not die because of the infection and mutation. He was strangled to death by this crazy biological mother. Tong Xiangyu's nose was sour, and when she thought of Songge, her throat was hard, and she couldn't hold back her tears at all. She choked and cried again. It was all her fault. It was all her fault. She shouldn't have cut her finger to feed blood to save Xiaozhe that night. Maybe there would be other ways. Even if there weren't, it wouldn't be her turn to save him. She was just an ordinary person, not a bodhisattva. Now save one, what about next? 10, 100, 1,000? She didn't want anything. She didn't want to save anything. She just wanted her Songge back. Tong Xiangyu broke down several times. She fainted from crying several times, and woke up again. However, every time she woke up, the nightmare in front of her continued, only the sky outside gradually darkened. Sister Huang fed Xiaozhe half a bottle of blood. At first, he couldn't get it down. It all accumulated in his mouth, and even flowed out from the corners of his mouth. But after finding the right angle, the esophagus tube was opened, and he was able to get it in. Only half a bottle had gone down, and the child hadn't woken up yet. Sister Huang said to herself, "Not enough." Then she put her son down, and stood up and came to Tong Xiangyu. Tong Xiangyu looked pale, and looked at Sister Huang with lifeless eyes. Sister Huang was cutting her fingers, but because her hands and feet were tied too tightly with vines for too long, the blood flow to her limbs was not smooth. She had just let out so much blood, and now she couldn't bleed much more. Although Tong Xiangyu wounds have a strong ability to heal themselves, the speed of blood growth has obviously not been enhanced accordingly. Sister Huang looked at the dripping blood, frowned in dissatisfaction, and glared at Tong Xiangyu. "You are so thin. It's all because you are too thin. So you have so little blood." Tong Xiangyu moved slightly. Sister Huang looked at her eyes, puzzled for a moment. "Do you want to talk?" Tong Xiangyu nodded. Sister Huang thought that Tong Xiangyu had been crying for so long, and she must have no energy to make trouble. But she still warned worriedly, "Don't cry and shout. Otherwise don't blame me for being rude. I don't want to hurt you." Tong Xiangyu nodded again. Sister Huang finally took off the cloth that was blocking her mouth. Tong Xiangyu's eyes were still swollen and dry. She asked in a hoarse voice, "Which mountain did you push Songge off?" She thought she was calm, but as soon as she asked the question, tears welled up in her painful eyes again. Sister Huang was disappointed and said, "You just asked this? Which mountain could it be? Of course. We solved it on the spot. I don't have the time to move you and her." Tong Xiangyu's eyes were blank. She thought of the hillside full of thorns at that time. The thorns were poisonous. She didn't see what was below, and how high it was. She choked and cried. That's enough. Sister Huang was about to stuff the cloth back into Tong Xiangyu's mouth. But then she remembered something and asked her, "Is it okay as long as it's your blood? It doesn't have to be your fingers?" Tong Xiangyu choked and shed tears, but didn't say anything. This can't go on. No matter how sad or desperate she is, she has to stop. She can't hold on to the mentality of I don't want to live if Songgu dies. She must cheer up. Leave here alive. And find Songgu. Songgu is so lucky, he will be fine. She still wants to take revenge on this madman. This is my special ability. Tong Xiangyu looked up at Sister Huang. She felt a little dizzy because of the excessive blood loss, and her voice was weak. It will only work if I take the initiative to treat him. Otherwise, why do you think he drank so much blood, but it didn't work? Sister Huang was stunned for a moment, but then she rushed to Tong Xiangyu in ecstasy. Really? You can save him anyway? It was already dark. Tong Xiangyu learned from Sister Huang's question that Sister Huang was really playing dumb. She knew very well that Xiaozhi was dead. As for why she strangled her son, Tong Xiangyu no longer cared about the reason. Tong Xiangyu just thought quietly, if I hadn't gone down the mountain to find Xiaozhi today, if I hadn't cut my blood to save Xiaozhi 2 days ago, she and Songgu waited quietly for the dawn, waiting to set off to the next hill. After the natural disaster, Captain Qiao and his team's radios were slowly recovering signals, and they were able to contact the shelter base intermittently. They were not far away. Really, not far away. They were only one step away from reaching the national government's rescue base. They had survived all the difficulties and dangers before, but just because of her compassion, Songgu was killed. Tong Xiangyu closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, she whispered yes. It was a dark and windy night. In the camping base on the hill, the atmosphere was so gloomy that water could drip out. Although they were assigned to watch the night, a child was lost in the middle of the night, and the adults, who helped to find him, lost 3 more in the blink of an eye. Not only that, the backpacks and supplies in the 2 tents in the camp suddenly disappeared. They were about to reach the government shelter. The radio could be used to contact them. And Xiao Mingshan didn't believe that Songgu and Tong Xiangyu would leave without saying goodbye at this critical moment. So it could only be Sister Huang who directed and acted this out herself, doing something stupid for Xiaozhi, who was already showing signs of infection. Looking at Xiang Weijun, who had been in a coma for the whole day and had no signs of waking up, Xiao Mingshan was so angry that he couldn't even eat a bite of dinner. Zhou Bo ate bread while lowering his head and said, "There are too many evil things on this mountain. Captain, I think it's better for us to continue our journey tomorrow morning." Xiao Mingshan immediately said, "Let's go. What about Songgu and Tong Xiangyu?" Zhou Bo obviously glanced at the blood-stained stone in the middle of the circle where everyone was sitting. He said nothing, but silence was more powerful than words. Xiao Mingshan understood what he meant and said in a stern tone, "What's this? I want to see the person alive or the body dead. I hope you don't forget that the lives of these people of ours were given by the 2 girls. Without them, we would have died that night when the meteorite fell from the sky." These words were deafening, and no one dared to speak for a while. After a while, Qin Nan said, "But we can't go down that hillside. So we can't go down to investigate. Otherwise, we should wait for Xiang Weijun to wake up and ask him if he saw anything?" Xiao Mingshan said with a stern face. "Wear a gas mask. I will go down and see it myself tomorrow." The sound of water was gurgling and icy cold. Songgu felt something rough licking her. She opened her heavy eyelids and saw a mutant dog with white eyeballs. "Little milk tea." Songgu turned her head and shouted subconsciously. She felt a sharp pain in her chest. The 3 short words seemed to pierce through several broken bones. Her eyes went dark and her head throbbed. She finally shouted, "Woof woof." Bai hurriedly swung his tail at her and circled around Songgu twice, as if he wanted to find another owner. Songgu struggled to sit up and found himself on a rocky beach. There was a mountain stream cliff next to him, and spring water flowing down. Except for the sound of water, there was silence all around. Songgu remembered that she was going to save the child. And then she smelled a strange fragrance. And then she lost all consciousness. Did she fall down from the hillside? Songgu looked up. But even if she could see in the dark, she could only see a very high, bare cliff in the mountain stream, with some jagged rocks and trees on the side. She didn't die after falling from such a height, so there must have been a lot of cushioning during the fall, probably due to the mutant vines. Otherwise she would have been smashed into a pulp. Songgu stood up slowly, holding her aching chest, smiled bitterly. It's over, the young lady must be frightened and crying. What can I do if no one comforts her? Songgu took a breath while enduring the severe pain, and felt that some of her ribs must have been broken. She took a few steps forward. Bai followed her closely, turning around anxiously, and then looking up and barking at Songgu. Songgu had only walked 3 or 5 steps, when she suddenly remembered something, and paused, and her face instantly turned pale. She lowered her head and cursed. Damn! You stupid dog! Several vines stretched out, and instantly tied up the mutant dog, and lifted it high. Bai immediately stopped barking. Songgu looked at the dog with a sullen face. Why are you looking for me? She has raised you for so long. You should stay close to her. That Huang Jia. Damn! Songgu just remembered that even the severe pain in her chest was suppressed by anxiety. She looked around to find the fastest way to climb up the mountain. Chapter 116 Rescue. It would take a lot of time and effort to go back up the mountain, and it was not known whether the original route could be found. The only way to get back up the same way as when you came down was to be safe. The cliff was smooth, and the water from the mountain stream quickly soaked the clothes. Songgu was not afraid of the cold. She controlled the vines to fly up more than 10 meters, and tightly tied a pine tree trunk rooted in the rock. Songgu pulled the vines, and confirmed that they were strong, and tried to use the force to hang in the air. However, the wound on her chest was pulled, and the pain made her eyes black, and a fishy sweetness instantly surged in her throat. Bai ran behind Songgu with his tail between his legs. Seeing that she had no intention of taking care of him, he did not get angry. Instead, he took care of himself. He jumped up and bit her trouser leg to hang on her. There were few objects on the cliff that Songgu could use as leverage, but the vines had a very strong rooting ability. They could even sink into the moss and stick tightly to the stone wall. In this way, Songgu only took a break when the pain was unbearable, and then continued to climb up little by little. The mountain stream was in the form of a cliff. After climbing up a few hundred meters, Songgu stood on a crooked tree and gasped for breath. She was already soaked. Her face was pale, and she didn't know where to cover her right hand. Her whole body was in pain. Her shoulders, her chest, her hips, her knees. She looked up, and there was still a long way to go. Songgu looked grim. Did she really fall from above? If she could survive, is she still a human being? But Songgu laughed at himself and said, if she was not a human being, how could she feel pain? At dawn, Qiao Mingshan and others set out, in order to prevent the camp supplies from being stolen, and to take care of the unconscious Yang Wei-jun. Zhou Bo and Qin Nan were left behind. Zhu Qingwu led the way, and they soon reached the dense forest. Qiao Mingshan put on a gas mask and tied a safety rope around his waist, and he went down the hillside smoothly. The thorns of the thorn bush were as big as a fingernail, and the tiny white flowers swayed in the wind. Qiao Mingshan didn't know if it was an illusion, but he saw the yellow stamens in each flower wriggling like little bugs. He came to his senses and looked carefully, but it was only the stamens. Captain Qiao. Lu Zhou on the hillside saw Qiao Mingshan stop and immediately shouted, is there anything wrong? Qiao Mingshan made an okay gesture to him, indicating that there was nothing wrong, and continued to control the lock to descend. The further down you go, the steeper the slope becomes. Dark green thorn bushes are everywhere. The bushes and wild flowers and grasses have obvious signs of being crushed. It seems that people did roll down from here. Qiao Mingshan felt heavy in his heart. He went down further, but he suddenly froze. The view below was wide. Looking up, you could see the scenery on the opposite mountain, and below this side, there was a 1,000-foot cliff. Looking down a few hundred meters, the bottom was shrouded in mist, and you couldn't see the bottom at all. Qiao Mingshan controlled the lock to return to the original path. Passing the thorn bush, he pulled out the axe on the tool belt at his waist, and chopped the thorns to pieces, as if to vent his anger, so that they would not hurt people again. At this time, a gust of wind blew, and countless small white flowers in the thorn swayed in the wind. Qiao Mingshan paused slightly. Several people above suddenly shouted in unison, Captain Qiao. Qiao Mingshan's axe slipped out of his hand, and he instantly lost consciousness and fell on the thorn bush. Lu Zhou hurriedly pulled the rope. However, the mountain wind from the bottom up was fierce, and it rolled up countless strong and strange fragrances. Because the few people on the hillside yesterday were fine, only the guards went down and got into trouble. So Zhu Qingwu, Lu Zhou, Fong Fong and others did not wear gas masks. When they smelled a strange fragrance, Zhu Qingwu realized that something was wrong and told everyone to hold their breath. But it was too late. 3 people lost consciousness and fell down one after another. In the camp, Zhou Bo actually did not support the action of the Captain Xiaoming Shan. He knew that the mountain was strange and dangerous. Looking at the situation, Song Ge and Tong Xiangyu must be in danger. It is reasonable not to take risks. The lives of those 2 people are lives, but the lives of so many people are not? They will reach the shelter soon. He is really tired of the days of wandering and having no place to stay for so long. And he really wants it to end soon. Zhou Bo walked into the tent. Xiang Weijun was still unconscious. Zhou Bo sat down beside him, scratched his hair. Old Xiang, what do you think we are trying to do? Anyway, there was no one else. Zhou Bo complained a lot to his unconscious good brother, and then he remembered that he was not the only one who went up the mountain. There was also Qin Nan. After Captain Xiao and his team went down the mountain, Qin Nan went into the tent. Originally, Qin Nan, a doctor, was supposed to lead Captain Xiao and his team down this trip, but because Qin Nan was dizzy due to his period, he was replaced by Zhu Qingwu. Women who are menstruating should be taken care of more. Zhou Bo didn't mind being heard. He felt relieved after complaining. He got up and walked out of the tent. He built a fire and boiled some hot water. Then he took a cup to Qin Nan's tent and shouted across the tent, "Xiao Nan, I boiled some hot water for you. Do you want to drink some now?" There was no response from inside. Zhou Bo shouted again, but still no response. He guessed that he might have gone back to sleep. So Zhou Bo returned to the fire and fried a few peanuts on an iron plate. No wine, just hot water and peanuts. Time passed slowly. Captain Xiao and his team had not come back yet. The bright midday sun gradually replaced the weak morning light. The sun was big, but the temperature was not very high. Zhou Bo cooked the rice, but he didn't wait for anyone to come back. Zhou Bo got up again to call Qin Nan. Still no response. Zhou Bo couldn't help thinking about that stubborn girl Qin Nan. Would she have secretly gone down the mountain to find Captain Xiao and his team while he was complaining to Xiang Weijun? Zhou Bo's heart skipped a beat. He didn't care about respect and immediately unzipped the tent. Qin Nan was sleeping soundly in the sleeping bag. Zhou Bo was relieved. Qin Nan? Qin Nan? Qin Nan didn't move. Zhou Bo frowned. Qin Nan. I'm coming in. Walking into the tent. He reached out and pushed Qin Nan. Wake up. Are you feeling so uncomfortable? Qin Nan didn't respond. Zhou Bo had a bad feeling in his heart. He shook her hard. But she still didn't respond. Shit! Zhou Bo yelled with an ugly expression. And immediately walked out of the tent, not forgetting to help her zip up the tent. He took out a gas mask from his bag and hurried down the mountain while putting it on. Everyone sat around and discussed it last night. But no one could say for sure why Xiang Weijun fainted halfway up the slope. When talking about the abnormality, Qin Nan said that she smelled a faint fragrance. But it should not be the problem of the incense. Otherwise she would have fainted. And now it seems that Qin Nan should not have reached the slope. And the amount of incense she smelled was small. So she did not faint yesterday, but fainted today. This means that it is not safe to stay on the hillside. Captain Xiao and his team only wear one gas mask. If the other 3 people fainted, Captain Xiao would definitely not be able to handle it alone. The sunlight was not bright but dazzling. Song Ge walked on the unfamiliar mountain road with 1 foot deep and 1 foot shallow. After climbing the cliff, there was a strange thorn bush with a fascinating fragrance. Song Ge could not go back the same way and repeat the experience of fainting and rolling off the cliff. So when she was about to finish climbing the cliff, she controlled the vines to adjust the angle and moved to the side. I only remember that the hillside was not small, but I am not sure how big it is. So Song Ge adjusted the angle too much. And the consequence is that she has no idea how far she has deviated, and which direction she should go. In short, she is lost. She climbed all night with serious injuries, exhausted all her strength, tired, painful, and still no direction. If Song Ge had a weak will, she would have given up resistance and let herself fall to the ground and sleep. But when she thought of her eldest daughter falling into the hands of that crazy woman, and waiting for her to rescue her in fear, Song Ge was extremely anxious. How could she fall like this? I can't hold on any longer. Song Ge leaned against a big tree. His internal organs seemed to have been displaced. His legs were numb. His ears were filled with his own irregular heartbeat, and everything he saw was blurry. Song Ge closed his eyes and gasped. His heart was tormented with anxiety. That Sister Huang had only one choice, kidnapping. Because she fell into a coma and rolled down the mountain, Tong Xiangyu would definitely find a way to find her and save her, and Sister Huang would beg Tong Xiangyu to save Xiaozha first. Her little Bodhisattva heart was so soft, she would definitely not refuse. As soon as Tong Xiangyu rescued Xiaozha, she would be kidnapped by Huang Jie. Human nature is like this. Selfish. But that crazy woman had better not do anything to hurt Tong Xiangyu. Song Ge didn't dare to rest every time she thought of this. She opened her eyes again, and her hearing and 5 senses that had long gone away seemed to come back a little. She lowered her head slowly, and saw the little mutant dog wagging its tail wildly, holding her trouser leg, and pulling it to the side. She didn't know how long it had been biting, and the trouser leg was bitten to pieces. How did this stupid dog catch up with me? Song Ge thought dully, and suddenly her heart jumped, realizing that the mutant dog's reaction was wrong, and immediately raised her foot to walk in the direction it was pulling. Bai smelled a familiar smell as soon as she reached the mountain. It ran wildly, with 4 short legs, but ran very fast, but after running more than 10 meters away, it looked back, and saw that Song Ge was going in another direction, and it was so anxious that it immediately went back to bite her trouser legs. But Song Ge seemed to have not noticed it at all, and walked all the way with it in the wrong direction. Bai was anxious and angry, barking at her, but the vines that turned into sharp blades in an instant poked in front of his eyes, scared him so much that he tucked his tail between his legs and shut his mouth. Bai could only bite her trouser legs and pull her hard, trying to take her to another owner. Even though the effect was almost zero, he never gave up trying. Finally, the other party seemed to understand. Bai didn't waste the opportunity, turned around and ran in another direction. Tong Xiangyu plan failed. She trembled and clung to the rock behind her. Her heart was filled with fear and despair. She couldn't muster any strength to resist, and on the side, the crazy woman was sharpening a knife, preparing to cut flesh from her. Last night, Tong Xiangyu told Sister Huang, "It will only work if I take the initiative to treat him. I can save him no matter what." She said that Song Ge was injured by the mutant vines, and was almost dead. It was she who saved him. Sister Huang believed it very much. She cried with joy at first, but soon she scolded indignantly. "No wonder she didn't let you save our Xiaozha. It turns out that she only wants to use you. What a selfish and vicious person." Tong Xiangyu did not refute, but just said at the right time that she could save Xiaozha. But Sister Huang wanted to take her back to the hillside. She did nothing but go and take a look. However, at this moment, Sister Huang was very rational. She thought for a while and said, "No, Xiao Mingshan and his men will definitely search there for a day or 2. We will run into them if we go now. Let's talk about it in 2 days." Sister Huang said, "But you have to save my son now." 2 days. 2 days is fine." Tong Xiangyu nodded with a pale face, and said, "But Xiaozha's current condition is very special. If you want to be completely cured, it will definitely not work in one go. It will take a longer time. Maybe a few days, or maybe a month. Do you have patience?" Sister Huang said quickly, "It's okay. It's okay. As long as she can be saved." The atmosphere seemed to get better all of a sudden. Tong Xiangyu said that the vines on her body were tied too tightly, and the poor blood flow would cause necrosis of her limbs. Sister Huang loosened the ties a little. Then she fed Tong Xiangyu food. Bread, potato chips, water. Tong Xiangyu couldn't eat anything. The food was stuck in her throat, and she couldn't swallow it at all. But she knew she had to eat to save her strength, so she endured the nausea and vomiting and forced herself to eat those. After eating, Tong Xiangyu took the initiative to cut some blood and fed it to Xiaozha's mouth, which was forced open by Huang Jie to fill with blood. In this way, Tong Xiangyu spent a relatively peaceful night in the cave. However, Tong Xiangyu did not sleep. She wanted to sleep and rest, but she could not sleep at all. When she closed her eyes, she kept flashing back to Huang Jie's ferocious expression when she hit her, and then imagined the scene of Huang Jie pushing Song Ge down the mountain, and then woke up. Tong Xiangyu waited for the day to dawn in the cold wind, in the repeated torment in her heart and the tears that flowed. Then something unexpected happened. Tong Xiangyu watched in horror as countless hyphae slowly grew out of Xiaozha's body. The hyphae entangled together to form mycelium, and grew fruiting bodies. When Huang Jie woke up at dawn, she saw dense white mushrooms growing under Xiaozha's skin, not only in his stomach, but also on his hands, neck and face. He was like a mushroom bag providing rich nutrition. Mushrooms even grew out of his mouth, ears, eyelids, and everywhere they could grow. Sister Huang went crazy. She picked up her son tremblingly and cried loudly in panic. Tong Xiangyu had been trying to save herself when Xiao's body changed. However, the vines were only loosened a little, because she had maintained the same posture for too long. Her hands and feet were numb. Her limbs were stiff and cold, and she had difficulty moving. Sister Huang, who had put Xiaoja down, rushed to Tong Xiangyu like crazy. Her eyes were bloodshot. "Didn't you say you could save him? Didn't you say he could be saved?" Sister Huang shook Tong Xiangyu hard. Tong Xiangyu back repeatedly hit the jagged rocks, and it was very painful. Looking at Sister Huang's crazy look, Tong Xiangyu felt that she would be killed by her in the next moment. Since she couldn't escape, her revenge plan was aborted. She shouted with all her strength, "Didn't you kill him yourself? You killed your own son. You?" Sister Huang was stunned. Her red eyes were open, and tears welled up. Tong Xiangyu didn't have much strength to begin with, and after she shouted, only a weak and trembling voice remained. He was still alive. Tong Xiangyu, when I rescued him, he was still alive. Sister Huang suddenly fell to the ground. The cave floor was wet, and dirty water splashed up. She just covered her face and cried hysterically. But after crying, Sister Huang stopped, as if she calmed down all of a sudden. She stood up, turned Xiaoja over, and covered him with a blanket. Then, Sister Huang picked up the military knife and walked in front of Tong Xiangyu. Tong Xiangyu tried to shrink back. Sister Huang's face was full of tears. Her hair was messy. And she suddenly smiled at Tong Xiangyu and said without a beginning or an end, "Since the zombie outbreak, I haven't eaten fresh meat for a long time." Tong Xiangyu fear rose to her throat. "You're crazy." Sister Huang ignored her and took out salt from her bag again. "Fresh meat can be roasted and eaten, but meat will rot if left for a long time, and it needs to be pickled with salt." Sister Huang studied Songgu military knife and took out a whetstone from her backpack. Songgu already knew where this place was. When they were looking for the child on the way, they passed by a cave, which was remote and rugged, with bushes and weeds growing on the roadside, and it looked difficult to pass through. But because we deviated from the direction when we went up the mountain and followed the mutant puppy all the way here, it was not difficult to find. Sister Huang sharpened the knife casually and walked to Tong Xiangyu, gesturing with the tip of the knife. Not knowing where to start first, finally, decided to start from the neck and cut the head from the body. The cold and sharp tip of the knife touched the neck. Tong Xiangyu closed her eyes tightly and collapsed and shouted the last word before death, "Songgu." Woof! The vicious barking of the dog seemed to come from far away, but it came to the cave entrance in an instant. Tong Xiangyu opened her eyes immediately. Bai used her small body to push away the grass and trees covering the entrance of the cave, and rushed towards the murderer. The sun was shining brightly outside. However, Sister Huang seemed to be unaware of it. She looked fierce, and her hands exerted great force, directly cutting off the slender white neck. Puff warm blood spread all over her face. Tong Xiangyu stared blankly with her eyes wide open. For a moment, she thought her head had been separated. She had seen a popular science video that said that if the head was beheaded too quickly, the head would blink many times after being separated from the body. But the next moment, the person who was blocking in front of her was thrown away with great force and hit the stone wall of the cave. Tong Xiangyu heard the noise, and then looked again, and saw that Sister Huang was pierced through, and the vine as thick as an arm went in and out of her left waist and right waist, and completely penetrated, and hit the mountain wall, and her flesh and blood were not only blurred, but also the intestines and fat in her body flowed out. Tong Xiangyu stared at this extremely disgusting and terrifying scene in a daze, and before she felt her scalp tingling. The next moment, she turned her head to look at the cave entrance in ecstasy, crying, "Songgu! Songgu!" She was a step late in vain, and could only bark madly at the woman's corpse, and then ran to Tong Xiangyu's side, and quickly bit off the vines that tied her. Tong Xiangyu was free, and immediately got up and stumbled out. Chapter 117 Hunt him. She knew Songgu would be fine. Tong Xiangyu ran out of the cave, and saw Songgu standing by a big tree not far away. The midday sun made people dizzy. Tong Xiangyu's eyes were filled with tears. She couldn't see Songgu's current condition clearly. She wanted to run over anxiously and aggrievedly, but she tripped. She had lost too much blood, hadn't slept or eaten well, was overly worried, and was extremely sad and happy. Tong Xiangyu's eyes were dizzy, and she fell to the ground. At this time, a vine gently wrapped around Tong Xiangyu's waist, as if it was holding her. Tong Xiangyu was slightly stunned. Before she could react, she was rolled up by the vine and brought to Song Ge. When Tong Xiangyu saw Song Ge's condition, she was frightened. Song Ge's condition was very bad. She leaned against the tree. Her face was pale. She was sweating profusely. Her clothes were dirty and torn in several places. She was panting, and she seemed to faint at any time. The vine let go of Tong Xiangyu. Song Ge. Tong Xiangyu wiped away her tears and hurried over to steady Song Ge. She remembered something and immediately looked for the military knife on her body. She also remembered that she had left it in a cave and turned around to run back, but her wrist was grabbed. Tong Xiangyu looked back at Song Ge anxiously. Song Ge, wait here. I be back soon. Song Ge refused, and her eyes were fixed on Tong Xiangyu, looking carefully bit by bit. Song Ge said softly, injured. Tong Xiangyu was silent for half a second and shook her head. Come. Song Ge didn't have the extra strength to pull her. He just moved his fingers. Although Tong Xiangyu was anxious, she still walked to Song Ge. Song Ge gathered some strength, with a little unreality, slowly raised his hand, and lightly touched the scratch on Tong Xiangyu's neck with his fingertips. It was a shallow scratch, and the scar was healing quickly, but the blood had not dried yet. Just now, when he heard Tong Xiangyu's desperate cry from the cave, Song Ge felt that his heart was crushed. All of a sudden, his eyes went black, and he didn't know what he had done. By the time she reacted, she had already controlled the vines to kill someone. It was just a short moment. Her brain was blank, and she had no relevant memories. She only felt the pain of bones exploding all over her body, and her strength was quickly drained. She couldn't even stand steadily. She then stretched out her hands to support herself on the tree. She saw Tong Xiangyu crying and running out of the cave. Song Ge had never experienced what it meant to be afraid. But at that moment, he was almost going crazy with fear. A little later, even a second later, the knife would cut off this thin and fragile throat. It's okay. Tong Xiangyu could feel Song Ge's bad mood. She held Song Ge's hand and put it on her face, sniffing. She was the one who had escaped death and was still in shock. Now she looked at Song Ge and comforted him. I'm okay, Song Ge, I'm fine. Aren't I? But your physical condition must be taken care of. No. Song Ge directly hugged Tong Xiangyu into his arms, and most of his weight was pressed on her. Song Ge hugged, embraced, filled her empty arms, and her heart, which had been beating fast and restlessly, finally calmed down. She finally felt the reality of regaining what she had lost. But perhaps it was because she relaxed the breath she had been holding in her heart. Song Ge felt her vision blurry, her head heavy, and the intense pain that felt like it was exploding all over her body was also fading away. Her consciousness was about to be detached. Song Ge forced herself to regain some consciousness. But no, she couldn't faint yet. She looked down at Tong Xiangyu and said hoarsely, You've lost weight. Tong Xiangyu's eyes were hot, and her nose was sore. She hugged Song Ge back, holding back her tears, and said, I will recover. Tong Xiangyu's strength was a bit too much. Song Ge felt the pain suddenly return, and he took a breath. And the person in his arms immediately let go and dodged as if startled. Tong Xiangyu pushed him away in panic, and supported Song Ge nervously, holding back her tears. What's wrong? Song Ge? It hurts? Right? Where are you hurt? Song Ge exhaled, and said, I'm not hurt. Song Ge, don't go. Tong Xiangyu, I won't go. Song Ge didn't know if he heard it or not, but he still held Tong Xiangyu's hand worriedly. Don't hurt yourself. Tong Xiangyu couldn't stop crying after hearing this. She quickly raised her hand and wiped it away, helped Song Ge, who was already unsteady, to sit down carefully. Okay. Song Ge, go slowly, be careful, be careful. After Song Ge sat down, the pain was relieved a little. Song Ge looked at Tong Xiangyu, who was crying like a little cat, pulled the corner of his mouth, and coaxed her like nothing happened. Come, hold me. Tong Xiangyu had just hugged her, and now she didn't dare, with tears hanging on her eyelashes. But, Song Ge said, do you think my clothes are dirty? You know it's not true. Tong Xiangyu felt very wronged. Her nose was sour, but she still leaned on Song Ge carefully and gently, asked, Does it hurt? Song Ge put his arm around her waist, and his face rested on her forehead. I said it's not hurt. Just hold me for a while, little milk tea, hold me for a while, and then, it's fine. Song-gu smelled the faint and pleasant fragrance coming from the other person, and his voice became softer and softer. Soon he closed his eyes and fell asleep. Tong Seong-yu put her palm on Song-gu's chest and heard her heartbeat, which was relatively stable. But stable does not mean that there is nothing wrong. Tong Seong-yu didn't know where Song-gu was injured, but it was obvious that she was seriously injured. In addition, Sister Huang said before that she pushed Song-gu down the mountain. How could she not be injured if she fell down the mountain while unconscious? Tong Seong-yu asked Song-gu to get better quickly, and was about to go to the cave to get a knife. But Song-gu was holding her, so she couldn't move at all. Tong Seong-yu looked around. Looking around, there was no tool to use. Wait! Tong Seong-yu saw a vine slowly wandering in the grass. Tong Seong-yu looked for a long time, and then hesitantly called out, "Hey! Hello!" The wandering vine paused, as if it looked back, and after realizing that it was talking to itself, its entire vine froze. And then the tip immediately raised high, and it grew two green and tender leaves with great joy, and shook it vigorously in response. Tong Seong-yu was stunned when she saw the scene, and then she couldn't help curling her lips. And she said, "Did Song-gu give you a name?" "Name?" The tip of the vine tilted to the left, seemingly expressing doubt. "It doesn't look like he would give you a name. Can I call you Tung Tung?" After saying that, Tong Seong-yu denied it herself. "No, Tung Tung is too unlucky, it should be safe and sound." Tong Seong-yu said to Tung Man, "I call you an, how about that?" Tung Man, "Stand." It didn't move, but a small pink flower slowly bloomed in the middle of the bud at the tip. And then the pink flower spread rapidly on the entire brown-green vine, as if it was contagious. And it looked pretty. Tong Seong-yu was stunned. Tong Seong-yu guessed, "It seems that you like this name?" The vine twisted on the spot. Tong Seong-yu thought about it, and whispered, "Can you move freely?" And then, "I gave you a name, so you have to help me do things. Go into the cave now. Take out your master's military knife, which should have fallen on the ground, and take out our backpacks, too. Okay?" The vine turned its head, and with a colorful outfit, it disappeared into the grass like a gust of wind. Tong Seong-yu was slightly frightened. Before Tong Seong-yu could react, the vine covered with small pink flowers came back, and the thin vines that split out held many things, including backpacks, cans, small blankets, unfinished potato chip bags, beef cubes, etc. Tong Seong-yu asked, "Where is the military knife?" Tingman put down the things he held one by one in front of Tong Seong-yu, then pretended not to understand, and immediately lay back in the grass, swimming slowly. He was also careful not to touch the flowers on the vine. It didn't want to take the knife. Not only didn't take it, it also buried it deep on purpose. Tong Seong-yu didn't understand, and seeing that Tingman ignored him, she could only look for it in her backpack. And Bai, who was not far away, saw it, and immediately turned around, and ran back to the cave on his 4 short legs, and sniffed, and then dug around. Finally, he bit out the military knife that was buried deep in the soil. Then, Bai saw a person who was stabbed to death not far away, whose fat, blood, and internal organs were all over the ground. He dropped the knife in his mouth angrily, and rushed over barking. Afterwards, Bai buried his red dog face in the water in the cave to wash it, then picked up the military knife again, and ran out of the cave briskly. Bai? Tong Seong-yu's pale face was full of joy. Bai actually found Song-gu military knife. Sure enough, mutated small animals have an advantage over mutated plants in this aspect. Tong Seong-yu immediately rubbed Bai's head. Bai was happy, and his little tail was shaking as happily as a propeller. Tong Seong-yu immediately picked up the military knife, and simply wiped the blade, and was about to cut her arm to let the blood out. However, at this time, a thin vine came out from nowhere, and gently wrapped around her wrist. It was not strong, but just prevented her from exerting force. Tong Seong-yu was startled suddenly, and when she saw it was a vine, she asked in confusion, "What's wrong?" But the vine did not move. The vine would only hold Tong Seong-yu back when she tried to use force with her knife hand, preventing her from doing so. Was it receiving an order, or had it become a part of Song-gu, with Song-gu consciousness? Tong Seong-yu remembered what Song-gu said before he fell into a coma. "Don't hurt yourself," and she coaxed the little vine in a gentle voice. "It's okay, I'll be fine in a moment, it won't hurt." The little vine remained unmoved, very rigid. Tong Xiangyu and it were in a stalemate for a moment, and had to let go. The little vine took the opportunity to stretch out another vine to put away the military knife, rolled up, rolled into its own body and leaves, then shrank and hid, and quickly disappeared. Tong Xiangyu's rescue plan was repeatedly frustrated. She could only observe Songge's condition again, feel her forehead temperature, listen to her breathing and heartbeat. All were normal. The sun was shining, warm wind was blowing. After all, she survived a disaster, and felt great sorrow and joy. Tong Xiangyu finally couldn't support her sleepy and tired eyelids, leaned lightly against Songge, closed her eyes, and fell asleep. When Songge woke up, it was already dark. The adequate rest restored some of his body functions. But although he had strength, the wound on his chest still hurt when he moved. However, Songge lowered his head, and saw Tong Xiangyu sleeping quietly in his arms. The pain was so small that it could be ignored. At this time, a small vine emerged. Songge looked. The small vine stretched out its body and leaves, and handed over the military knife. Songge took it, and put it on his waistband. Songge knew what Tong Xiangyu was going to do when she turned around. This little fool. Her face was as white as paper, and she was so weak that she could be blown down by a gust of wind. But she still wanted to cut her blood to save her. She couldn't stop this young lady from hurting herself to save others. But she wouldn't let Tong Xiangyu save her by hurting herself. Songge kissed Tong Xiangyu's forehead gently, and then raised her eyes. Under the setting sun, the cave was half covered by grass and trees. The warmth in Songge's eyes quickly dissipated, leaving only coldness. It was such a relief for that crazy woman to die so easily. The night was as cold as water. When Tong Xiangyu opened her eyes, she saw the darkness around her. She was stunned for a few seconds. The first reaction was that she was dreaming, and Songge did not come to save her. Then, she heard Songge's low and gentle voice from above her head. "Did I wake you up?" Tong Xiangyu reacted, and tears welled up instantly. She hugged Songge tightly and apologized with sobs. I'm sorry. Songge blames me." Seeing her emotional outburst, Songge thought she had a nightmare, and patted her back gently to comfort her. "It's okay. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. I'm here." Songge woo. Tong Xiangyu cried so hard that she couldn't stop crying. She apologized for this and that. But because of her sobbing, Songge couldn't understand what she said. Anyway, he knew that she didn't have a nightmare. But because of what happened before, Songge patted her gently to comfort her, and said it was okay. And then said, "It's my fault. I was careless. I'm sorry, I scared you so much." Tong Xiangyu cried even harder after hearing this. She finally stopped crying. Tong Xiangyu leaned on Songge's shoulder, and suddenly pulled up her sleeves. "Songge, I'm fine. I want to cut a little blood for you. I'm really not hurt." Songge said softly, "I just can't find you. I'm very anxious, and when I'm anxious, I look a little worse." Tong Xiangyu sobbed softly, looked up, and looked at Songge with red eyes. Really? Songge, of course it's true." Songge looked at her and said, "You want me to drink your blood? Why don't you let me kiss you?" Tong Xiangyu immediately closed her eyes, pursed her lips that were a little bloody, and said, "Then kiss me." Songge didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and lowered his head and kissed her. Tong Xiangyu opened her wet almond eyes, looked at her, blinked her eyelashes with tears. "Is it all right now?" Songge, "Yes." Tong Xiangyu looked at her, pursed her lips, and looked aggrieved. Songge wiped the tears from her face with his fingertips, then lowered his head, and kissed her for a long time. The process was very gentle. The two warm and slippery tongues entangled with each other, exchanging sweet saliva. Insects chirped in the mountains. The small lipstick flashlight was shining. The light could not illuminate the two people kissing. They could only hear the ambiguous sound of water, and the gradually obvious breathing under the entanglement of lips and teeth. After the kiss, the lips parted, and the silver thread remained. Tong Xiangyu realized it late and felt shy. She panted and leaned into Songge's arms. Songge hugged her, and thought it was amazing. Xiao Nichao once said that kissing would secrete dopamine, which would make people feel happy, blush, and have a faster heartbeat. It really worked. She felt that the wound on her chest was not so painful anymore. Songge took something from his backpack for Tong Xiangyu to eat. Tong Xiangyu ate while talking to Songge. They almost knew what they had experienced during the time they were apart. Songge, "So, I didn't fall down by myself, but was pushed down by a woman?" Tong Xiangyu nodded. If you woke up at the bottom of the mountain stream, then she must have really pushed you down the mountain. Because I rescued you and Xiaozha at that time. Tong Xiangyu eyelashes drooped when she said this. I didn't expect Sister Huang to be so crazy that she strangled Xiaozha to death. Song Ge didn't say anything, but thought that there were many things you didn't expect. Tong Xiangyu ate a bite of biscuits in silence, probably thinking that this topic was too heavy. She looked at Song Ge's face again, and saw that his face was indeed a little better, and asked, Song Ge, are you really not injured? Yeah. Song Ge looked at her calmly. If you don't believe me, and ask me again, I will kiss you directly. Tong Xiangyu asked, does it count this time? Song Ge, it doesn't count this time. Tong Xiangyu thought about it, and asked seriously, Song Ge, are you really not injured? Song Ge paused, and couldn't help laughing. After eating and resting, they had to find a way to go up the mountain to meet up with Xiao Meishan and the others. The premise is that they are still there. Tong Xiangyu said, of course they are still there, everyone must be worried crazy. Song Ge said, not necessarily. This cave is not very hidden. If they wanted to find it, how could they not find it after so long? Didn't they send out flares at that time? Flares? Tong Xiangyu eyes lit up instantly. Yes, how could I forget this? I still have flares on me. Chapter 118 Leave. Bang. The bright flare was launched, emitting a striking red light in the dark night. Although Song Ge and Tong Xiangyu had released the flare, they did not just wait there, since they had a dog that could tell the way. Of course, it would be best if they met someone on the road, but if not, it didn't matter, since the direction of the shelter was known, and it was not far away, at most 10 days or half a month away. They still had a lot of supplies, so it was not difficult to find their way there. Zhou Bo on the top of the mountain saw the signal flare. He couldn't believe that he could still see their signal flare, when everyone had already fallen. In that ominous direction. Zhou Bo never wanted to go to that strange dense forest again. He would never forget the scene he saw when he rushed there wearing a gas mask. Fang Fang, Lu Zhou, Zhu Qingwu were lying unconscious on the ground, and Captain Qiao, wearing a gas mask, was suspended by a safety rope on the halfway slope, and was also in a coma. It took more than 2 hours to go back and forth, and finally he carried them all back to the camp. The fire crackled. Zhou Bo came to his senses, and looked at the 6 teammates who were unconscious, pale, and had not woken up. The firelight reflected on Zhou Bo's face, his expression was calm, but his eyes were full of complexity and struggle. Finally, he took the gas mask, put on the gun, shone the flashlight, and strode towards the direction of the flare. Tong Xiangyu was shocked when she saw Zhou Bo. The range of their flashlights was limited. When the other party appeared, they had a dark green head on top, like some mutated monster. Nowadays, even animals and plants are mutated, so it is not surprising to see some strange monsters. Fortunately, after Zhou Bo found them, he took off his mask immediately and revealed his face. Song Ge? Xiao Yu? Why did you come up by yourself? Zhou Bo was still surprised. He thought the situation was critical, and he needed to go to rescue. He quickly looked at the 2 girls. Although they looked embarrassed, they seemed to be in good health. Tong Xiangyu, brother Zhou. Yeah. Zhou Bo put his gun back into the butt, offered to help them get their things, and asked, where did you 2 go? Captain Qiao and the others were so worried. Tong Xiangyu recalled the experience of the past 2 days and 1 night. She could only describe it as a nightmare. She pursed her lips and whispered, it's a long story. Zhou Bo, it's okay. I tell you slowly when I get back. Song Ge did not hand the backpack to Zhou Bo, but asked casually, are you coming down alone? This is not normal. According to Captain Qiao's usual dispatch, it is impossible for him to send Zhou Bo down the mountain to meet after seeing the signal flare. Zhou Bo couldn't help but smile bitterly when he heard Song Ge's words. That's because I am the only one who can go down the mountain now. Captain Qiao and the others are all unconscious. Unconscious? Tong Xiangyu was very shocked. How could that be? Zhou Bo immediately looked at Tong Xiangyu and asked curiously, you don't know? It was the hillside where you sent the signal flare. The hillside was covered with thorns and had a strange fragrance. Once you smelled it, you fainted. Song Ge listened to Zhou Bo's explanation in detail, and there was nothing wrong with it. She was even wearing a gas mask just now, so she believed it. Let down her guard, and handed the bag to her. Zhou Bo took it, walked in front to lead the way, sighed, and continued, we rushed there to find you. But there was only a bloody stone at the scene. The hillside looked like it had been crushed. Xiang Weijun said he would go down the mountain to check the situation. But he suddenly fainted. An emergency occurred. We can only return to the camp first. After knowing the situation, Captain Xiao personally led people to look for you again this morning, but Zhou Bo did not continue with the but in his words, because he had already said it before. He suddenly remembered and asked Song Ge, "Why, didn't you encounter such a thing?" Song Ge did not answer Zhou Bo immediately, but turned to ask Tong Xiangyu, "What's the matter with the bloody stone?" Just now, the two of them talked about what happened in the past 2 days, and Tong Xiangyu had never mentioned this. Tong Xiangyu was originally worried about the situation of Captain Xiao and the others. When she heard Song Ge question, she paused, looked at him guiltily, and said carefully, "Sister Huang hit me with a stone at that time." Song Ge repeated the word, "Hit? Smash." Tong Xiangyu wisely changed the word. But after hearing this, Song Ge's face quickly darkened. It turned out that the madman died too easily. After waking up in the afternoon, Song Ge went to the cave alone to see it. The environment was cold, and no light could get in. The child was already covered with mushrooms, and the clothes on the crazy woman had been bitten to pieces. There was almost only a pile of bones left on her body, bitten by the mutant dog. The scene was a bit ugly. However, no matter how much torture one suffers after death, there is no pain. She should be allowed to feel it while alive. Tong Xiangyu saw Song Ge's face turn bad, quietly reached out to hold her hand, pinched her, and shook her lightly to comfort her. Song Ge glanced at her. Zhou Bo thought that it was indeed the case. That's how they guessed. But Zhou Bo still had to remain shocked, and asked, "Sister Huang? Why would Sister Huang hurt you?" Song Ge was about to speak, but Tong Xiangyu beat her to the punch. "Tong Xiangyu, how should I know? Sister Huang is simply crazy." Tong Xiangyu spoke quickly, appearing panicked and afraid. "We immediately fired a signal flare after we found Xiaozha on that hill, wanting to tell you that we had found the child, and that you should stop looking for him. I didn't expect that within a short while." Song Ge fainted, and then I was knocked unconscious by Sister Huang. After I woke up, I realized that Sister Huang pushed Song Ge down the hill, and the reason she didn't kill me was because she wanted me to use my supernatural power to save Xiaozha. But you all know that my supernatural power can only heal myself, not save others. Sister Huang may be desperate. She doesn't believe that Xiaozha's condition hasn't improved at all, but he was ripped out of his stomach by the parasitic mushroom and died. Song Ge raised his eyebrows slightly, almost imperceptibly. This is a good rhetoric. The more Zhou Bo listened, the more he believed it. After all, it was almost the same as their speculation, including Sister Huang's motives, and how Song Ge, who was good at fighting, was solved. Zhou Bo asked, "What about Sister Huang?" Tong Xiangyu immediately felt depressed and fabricated a story in a very realistic way after Xiaozha's tragic death. Sister Huang went completely crazy. She kept crying while holding Xiaozha's body. I fainted due to excessive blood loss. When I woke up, I found that Sister Huang was dead. There was a lot of blood on the ground. She was still holding Xiaozha. Song Ge took over the conversation at the right time. She committed suicide. She did the same thing the night she came down the mountain from the air raid shelter. Her son was gone. And she also said she didn't want to live anymore. She swore to her son as her life would tell her. Tong Xiangyu and Song Ge sang the same tune. The details of the incident were clear, and the logic before and after was also consistent. Zhou Bo did not doubt him, and only sighed, "Why bother? People should still look forward when they are alive." Song Ge was still injured, and Tong Xiangyu had lost too much blood. They walked slowly, and it was more than half an hour later when they returned to the camp. The fire had dimmed because no one added firewood, and the wood burned into red charcoal. But there was still light. People lying unconscious in several tents could be seen. Zhou Bo helped Song Ge, and the others put their backpacks back into the tent. And then he remembered something and asked Song Ge, "Song Ge, you also fainted after smelling the strange fragrance, right?" Song Ge did not forget what Tong Xiangyu had said before, and continued, "Well, after rescuing the child, I felt a strange smell in the wind, and then I lost consciousness. Very quickly, as if in an instant." Zhou Bo remembered that Xiang Weijun also fainted very quickly at that time. He said, "You woke up in 2 days? Why hasn't Lao Xiang woken up yet? He has also been unconscious for 2 days. Maybe he inhaled more?" Song Ge continued to make up. "I was only on the top of the hillside at that time, And I caught the child who fell up. And I didn't stay there for too long. Hearing this, Zhou Bo remembered that Xiang Wei-jun went down the hillside. And so did Captain Qiao. And it seemed to match. Zhou Bo sighed. But at the same time, he felt a little relieved. He went to the fire to add wood. And said, as long as he can wake up, it's fine. 2 more days is 2 more days. Song-gu did wake up in 2 days. But Song-gu was not sure whether it was related to the amount of incense inhaled. Because Tong Xiangyu said that when she was rescued, she reached out and touched the vine that appeared at the critical moment. After the vine was stained with blood, it was almost out of strength, but suddenly regained its vitality and helped rescue her. So, which one is the reason is still to be discussed. Zhou Bo added firewood to the fire, boiled the unfinished rice with water into rice soup, and then served it out, and gave it to Tong Xiangyu and Song-gu, and gave them pickles as side dishes. Tong Xiangyu took it, and was very grateful. Thank you, Brother Zhou. Zhou Bo said, you're welcome, have a good rest after eating, I will keep watch. Thank you, Brother Zhou. It's my duty. The night was quiet, with occasional wind. After Tong Xiangyu finished eating, she leaned on Song-gu's arms to sleep. Compared to the cold and damp cave, this simple tent is simply 100 times better. Besides, Sister Huang, who hadn't gone crazy yet, came to bleed her every now and then. Only Song-gu, who made her feel at ease. Tong Xiangyu wished she could become a warm baby, and stick to Song-gu all the time. After Song-gu stopped making any noise outside, he suddenly whispered to Tong Xiangyu, Little milk tea, we should go. Tong Xiangyu had just woken up, and of course she wasn't sleepy. She immediately opened her eyes, and whispered doubtfully, Go! Song-gu, yes. Song-gu said, what if they don't wake up? Do we have to wait here forever? In this situation, it would be disadvantageous for us to stay 1 more day. Zhou Bo is different from Sister Huang, who is unarmed and full of madness. Zhou Bo is a special police officer, has a gun, and is proficient in using other hot weapons. Tong Xiangyu has a strong healing ability. Although her words tonight have temporarily fooled Zhou Bo. If everyone can't wake up, Zhou Bo will sooner or later suspect them. And then, they will be in danger. Tong Xiangyu frowned slightly. But, Song-gu said, I already know where the shelter is. And I also know how to get there. I will definitely take you there in half a month at most. And then you can find your parents. Tong Xiangyu was silent. Seeing that Tong Xiangyu was slow to respond, Song-gu reached out and circled Tong Xiangyu's waist, and pressed her against his chest. At that moment, Song-gu wanted to say, Little milk tea, I really don't want any more accidents. I don't want to take any risks that might hurt you, or even lose you. But Song-gu couldn't say such a cheesy thing. It was quiet outside, there was really no movement at all. Even the sound of burning wood could be heard, but Zhou Bo movement was not heard. Tong Xiangyu drooped her eyelashes, hesitated for a long time, and then whispered, But, Captain Qiao and Sister Nan Nan, they all came to save us. Don't put pressure on yourself. Song-gu said, if it wasn't us who found the child on the hillside that day, but them, wouldn't they have gone to save him? There won't be any accidents. Won't they fall into a coma? Tong Xiangyu, that's true. But, Song-gu was afraid of the but that the young lady would say. But she couldn't stop her from saying it. So she could only ask, but what? Tong Xiangyu, but the fact is that they fell into a coma in order to find us and save us. After saying that, Tong Xiangyu finally had the courage to look up and look at Song-gu. Tong Xiangyu looked at Song-gu and said, I know. You will definitely think that I am a little moral model. I am a little bodhisattva. I am meddling in other people's business. And I will definitely bring myself countless troubles. But, Tong Xiangyu assured, Song-gu, after what happened with Sister Huang, I really know how dangerous it is to expose my abilities. I will not expose myself again. Song-gu knew the young lady rhetoric, and felt a little helpless, but was willing to indulge, and was happy with it. So is this your last time? Tong Xiangyu pursed her lips, blinked her beautiful and innocent eyes and looked at her, and said, do it quietly, okay? Quietly add a little blood to their water, or food. So that everyone can wake up. Song-gu didn't say anything, seemingly thinking. Tong Xiangyu said, then, the 2 of us will go, not with them. Song-gu raised his eyes, and looked at her. Really? Tong Xiangyu promised seriously, and kissed her again, and her cool little hand reached under Song-gu's clothes, touched her waist and back, and said coquettishly, okay Song-gu. Song-gu tightened his waist, grabbed her rebellious little hand, and said in a dry voice, Don't touch me randomly. Tong Xiangyu hummed softly. I didn't touch you randomly. I was just acting cute with my girlfriend. Girlfriend? Yes. Song-gu thought for a moment. And said, okay then. Tong Xiangyu was instantly happy. Yeah. I knew you were the best. Song-gu sat up and took the backpack. Tong Xiangyu was puzzled for a moment. Song-gu, what are you doing with the bag? Song-gu quickly took out an empty can from the bag. The can was empty, but there was still a layer of thick blood flowing underneath. It was the can that Sister Huang had used to hold Tong Xiangyu blood. Use this. Song-gu handed it to Tong Xiangyu, and seeing her eyes widen, Song-gu said, I won't let you hurt yourself again. Tong Xiangyu took the bottle, and just as she hesitated and said okay, she heard a bang from outside. Song-gu and Tong Xiangyu looked at each other, and immediately got up to look outside the tent, but saw Zhou Bo, who was in charge of the night watch, lying on the ground. Song-gu frowned, and walked over little by little, only to see Zhou Bo's face turn slightly pale, and his chest still rose and fell normally. Tong Xiangyu followed Song-gu and said, Brother Zhou said that Sister Nan Nan did not faint that day, and she showed symptoms the next day. Captain Chiao was clearly wearing a gas mask, but still got infected. Brother Zhou had to pull Captain Chiao up from the hillside and go back and forth to rescue people in that place. He must have inhaled the incense. Song-gu thought that this person should have fainted a long time ago. But he just fell down now. She felt that the situation outside was too quiet and abnormal a long time ago. Song-gu said, It's just right. Let's feed them now. Ah? Tong Xiangyu said worriedly, but now even Brother Zhou fainted, who will keep watch? What if there are wild animals on the mountain attacking them? Song-gu looked at Tong Xiangyu, his eyes were calm. Tong Xiangyu quickly changed his words. Okay, feed now. Feed now. It's been so long, I haven't seen any small animals on the mountain. Song-gu then responded, Yeah. Be good. Tong Xiangyu was slightly stunned, and immediately looked at Song-gu, but saw that Song-gu's expression did not change at all. Tong Xiangyu had to pout, thinking that she must have heard it wrong. Add water to the can and shake it evenly, then feed everyone a little, and help to pull up the tent. Tong Xiangyu thought that Song-gu asked her to feed him now, and that he was going to leave overnight. But he didn't. Tong Xiangyu was still weak, and Song-gu certainly couldn't take her on the journey overnight. The two of them slept at night, and got up at dawn the next day. When they got up the next day, the pain in Song-gu's chest was negligible. Tong Xiangyu checked the tents one by one. Everyone slept well, breathing deeply, but their faces looked better. Not so pale. And they would probably wake up today or tomorrow at the latest. Let's go. Little milk tea. I'm coming. Tong Xiangyu originally wrote a letter, wanted to put it in Qin Nan's hand, but in the end, she decided not to keep it, and took the letter away. Tong Xiangyu walked out of the tent. The morning light was gentle. Tong Xiangyu saw that Song-gu had packed up the simple tent and backpack, and hurried to Song-gu. I take some. However, as soon as the voice fell, several vines picked up all the light and heavy things in a few seconds, with a clear division of labor. Tong Xiangyu, wow! Song-gu stretched out his hand to her. What are you taking? Come and hold your dear girlfriend's hand. Tong Xiangyu looked at Song-gu, but saw that Song-gu's eyes slightly avoided. Tong Xiangyu couldn't help but purse her lips and smile brightly, with curved eyebrows, reaching out to hold her hand. Okay. Chapter 119. Are you scared? Before, I followed the main group, with Zhou Bo to lead the way, and Xiao Mingshan radioed to contact the shelter on the way. Although the progress was slow, it was safer to advance and retreat together. Now that I am not following the team, I can only rely on Bai Bai to lead the way. This mutant dog is sometimes reliable, and sometimes not. The way it leads is strange. When the road is narrow and steep, Song-gu can't lead Tong Xiangyu, so he cut a branch for her to use as a crutch. But after a while, a vine took the initiative to wrap around Tong Xiangyu's hand, and quietly replaced the branch with some scheming. The vine was originally tough and a little soft, but now in Tong Xiangyu's hand, it was as straight and hard as a cane. Tong Xiangyu turned back and said to Song-gu, as if she had discovered a new world. Song-gu. Look! It can actually become like this. Can it transform into 72 different forms? The vine cannot stand being praised. Once praised, it floated. It immediately turned into a fence-like vine handrail for Tong Xiangyu, and then turned into a vine umbrella hanging over Tong Xiangyu's head. Song-gu looked at the eager vine, which looked like a peacock spreading its tail. and suddenly found something and said, "Why is it blooming? When did it bloom?" Tong Xiangyu glanced at the pink flowers and smiled. "Oh, yes. I forgot to tell you. I gave your vine a name. Songge. Why do vines have to be named? Songge. Aren't you curious?" Songge responded, "Curious. What's the name?" "An N for peace." "Oh. Oh." Tong Xiangyu said, "An N likes it very much." "Right. An N?" And then immediately pulled out a thin tender branch to wrap around Tong Xiangyu's fingers. Shook it a few times, indicating that it was right. Songge saw it, but didn't say anything. Tong Xiangyu said, "So, Songge, you should call it by its name in the future." Songge, "No. What do you mean?" "So stupid." Tong Xiangyu was immediately dissatisfied. "Stupid? What's stupid about the name An? It's obviously full of good wishes." "Okay." The flowers on An N's body were still blooming at that time. "It's not the name that's stupid," Songge said. "It's the fact that it's stupid to call the rattan by its name. Be careful with your feet. There's a loose stone there." "Oh." Tong Xiangyu lowered her head and walked carefully along that stretch of road, then continued to argue with Songge. "Why is this so stupid? Your vines can understand human words, understand human nature, and have life, so of course we have to respect them." Tong Xiangyu said. Confucius said, "You must correct the name. If the name is not correct, the words will not flow, and if the words are not flowing, the things will not be done. When you need to order the vines, you can't just say, 'Go. Vines, right?' That would be so stupid." Before the battle, Xiaoji would shout, "Go Pikachu." Songge thought to herself, "Why can't I not shout? Why should I shout when I can control something with my mind alone?" Tong Xiangyu didn't hear Songge answer, and immediately asked in a coquettish voice, "Do you have any objections, secretly refute in your heart?" Songge, "No. I think what you said makes sense." Tong Xiangyu didn't let her get away with it. "Then will you call me by my name in the future?" Call me when you need it in the future." Tong Xiangyu was satisfied. "That's right." Songge thought, "The only time I can use it is when I can make you a young lady happy." For a whole morning, the two chatted while walking not fast, but they crossed half of the mountain. Songge took into consideration that Tong Xiangyu was still weak, and did not walk too long, stopping to rest. Took out 2 folding chairs, and a small table. Put food and drinks on the small table. The breeze on the mountain was gentle, and the sun was just right. Tong Xiangyu was sweating a little, and the warm wind was very comfortable. After she finished eating, she closed her eyes to enjoy it, and then opened her eyes, and happily shared with Songge. No wonder poets liked to retreat to the mountains in the past. The air on the mountain is so good, and the days are leisurely. Picking chrysanthemums under the eastern fence and leisurely seeing the southern mountains. Your mood will unconsciously slow down and become very good. Unlike in the city, it is either high-intensity work and fast-paced life, or boring and monotonous trivial matters of firewood, rice, oil and salt. Songge, you're complaining now. Didn't you just complain about not being able to take the college entrance exam? The two talked about this topic not long ago. Tong Xiangyu asked, "Songge, do you think we can go back to the past after finding a shelter?" Songge, back to the past? That means going back to school and taking the college entrance exam. At this time, you're still thinking about taking the exam? It's not an ordinary exam, it's the college entrance exam. Thousands of people are crossing a single plank bridge, and so many students across the country are waiting for this big exam to get into their favorite school and plan a bright future for themselves. It is a very important stage in life. As a poor student who has been getting by for 10 years, Songge can't really empathize with him. And he echoed, "Is that so?" Tong Xiangyu then remembered that a good university and a bright future didn't seem to have much to do with Songge, and hurriedly changed his words to coax him. Of course, university is not the only way out. Many people who can't get into university live better, and their lives are more enjoyable and enviable. Songge knew that the little bodhisattva was thinking about him again, and after thinking for a while, he asked, "Then can I not afford to support you?" "How could it be? I'm easy to support. College tuition is expensive." "Right? No, I have good grades. Not only do I not have to pay tuition, the school will also give me a scholarship." Even before, Mr. Zhu had approached me to discuss the recommendation, but I didn't agree. "It sounds great, so can I be a gigolo? If you want, I will definitely give it to you." "Forget it," Songge said. I'm not used to it. The gigolo should be given to the delicate young lady with a bad stomach. Who are you calling spoiled? First of all, let's exclude our little milk tea princess. That's more like it. Now when the college entrance examination was mentioned again, Tong Xiangyu snorted softly, and said defensively, I'm not complaining, I just thought of it suddenly. Because the shelter is coming soon, and after such a big disaster, it should be difficult for the country to recover and return to its previous state in a short period of time. But Song Ge thought, you still want to recover in a short time? The world may have already entered a new era. Have you ever seen monsters, superpowers, vines growing on people, mushrooms growing, and other things before? The reason why a thing can be stable is that it is because of the inheritance since ancient times, which gradually evolved into rules. And now, natural disasters continue, human cognition is constantly being refreshed. When scientific common sense fails, known things exceed the limit and are disrupted to become unknown, humans will naturally fall into panic. Because people can only learn from past events, and then come up with corresponding solutions. However, given the current situation, every day in the future will be a Pandora's box. When trying to survive is the top priority, people will not care about other things. In this way, humans are really fragile and insignificant. Tong Xiangyu continued to mutter, I don't know if those monsters will die on their own. Song Ge, your mutant dog doesn't look like it will die. Tong Xiangyu also looked at Bai Bai. Yes. By the way, Song Ge, do you think Bai Bai has grown a lot? At first, it looked very small, just the size of an ordinary poodle, but now it's this big. Bai Bai, who was basking in the sun in the bushes in the distance, heard his master calling him, and immediately ran over excitedly, sticking out his tongue and wagging his tail. Song Ge looked at this silly dog and said, maybe? Tong Xiangyu looked at Bai Bai, and his thoughts couldn't help but diverge. Song Ge, do you think that when monsters continue to evolve, will they become enemies of humans? For example, there will be 3 species living on the earth at the same time in the future, humans, mutated animals, mutated plants. Song Ge said, humans should not allow such an invasion. Ah? What should we do then? We can destroy it with hot weapons. Song Ge speculated, we can set up a special army to eliminate mutant animals and plants. Tong Xiangyu eyes lit up. Wow, it sounds so exciting. Song Ge looked at her, smiled. You are not afraid at all. What are you afraid of? We have seen a lot along the way. I have experienced many storms. Yes, our little milk tea has seen enough of the world. After a day's journey, there was no trouble or danger, and Xiao Mingshan and his men did not follow. The sun was setting. Song Ge set up a tent in a relatively flat valley, next to a small stream. The stream water was like ice water that had just melted, and it was freezing cold. Song Ge built a stove, made a fire. The two watched the water in the pot gradually boil. Tong Xiangyu leaned lightly on Song Ge's shoulder, and held Song Ge's fingers, watching the boiling water, watching the jumping fire, feeling warm on her face, comfortable and comfortable. The surroundings were quiet, silent, with only the crackling sound of the warm firewood burning. Tong Xiangyu suddenly looked up at Song Ge. Song Ge just looked down at her, and their eyes met. Song Ge, what's wrong? Tong Xiangyu said a little coquettishly. I want a kiss. Song Ge satisfied his girlfriend, who loved to act like a spoiled child. He lowered his head, and kissed Tong Xiangyu affectionately for a long time. After the kiss, both of them were a little breathless. Their eyes were sticky. They kissed a few more times. Tong Xiangyu hugged Song Ge's waist with both hands, and her fingers randomly pulled out the hem of Song Ge's clothes. What do you want to do again? Song Ge asked hoarsely. Tong Xiangyu looked at Song Ge. Her bright almond eyes curved like a crescent moon, and she smiled very lovably and cutely. My hands are cold. Song Ge let Tong Xiangyu put her hands on his waist, and reached out to hug her tighter, and then lifted her hips without any instruction. Tong Xiangyu followed Song Ge's movements, and finally sat on Song Ge's legs, facing each other, and snuggled in Song Ge's arms. Song Ge, is it warm now? Tong Xiangyu nodded, and hugged Song Ge back with satisfaction. She liked this kind of intimate distance. Tong Xiangyu asked, Song Ge, after we find a shelter, will you still be so nice to me? Song Ge, am I nice to you? Tong Xiangyu nodded. Song Ge said, but I don't feel that I am nice to you. You are very good to me. You saved me many times. So you saved me many times. When we left Kaching, in the secret base in Taiyuan, and in the car accident after the wildfire, it was you who found the air raid shelter. And you fed me blood when I was injured by the mutant vines. But, if it weren't for me, you wouldn't have fallen into those dangers. Song-gu was silent for a moment, and said, yes. But now they have become the colors of my life. Tong Xiangyu was slightly startled, and looked up at Song-gu. Song-gu looked at her, and whispered, without you, I might be able to find a shelter by myself. But I would just live in a different place. You know how I lived before. Tong Xiangyu felt distressed, and hugged Song-gu tightly to comfort her. It will never be like that again. Song-gu hugged Tong Xiangyu tightly in his arms. There was no one else here, so there was no need to worry about being heard by others. In the quiet night, Song-gu heard his heartbeat gradually speeding up. Song-gu embraced such a sweet and soft feeling. Are you afraid? Yes. After arriving at the shelter, she has real protection. Maybe this young lady will no longer need her. This sudden and huge disaster swept across the country and even the world. Many people died, and those who survived also lost a lot. Only her. Perhaps it was because her parents were in heaven that they gave her such a precious memory that cannot be replicated, allowing her to see a bright and warm light in the dark and cold world. And she followed the beam of light, and caught the warm and beautiful little sun. Her world gradually became brighter, full of colorful, lively laughter. Will she lose it? Will she be able to accept it calmly at that time? Song-gu didn't know. Song-gu unconsciously reached into Tong Xiangyu's skirt. She touched her slender and smooth waist, and gave Tong Xiangyu a sticky kiss. Then forced herself to separate, and said in a low and hoarse voice, Go back to the tent? It seems a bit cold outside. Tong Xiangyu was about to say that it wasn't cold to roast by the fire, but when she saw the hope and desire in Song-gu's eyes, Tong Xiangyu's mind went blank, her heartbeat instantly slowed down, and her ears turned red as she stuttered. Okay. The two entered the tent. A vine rolled up a piece of wood and added it to the burning fire. Another vine whizzed away, accurately grabbed a small snake that seemed to have just hatched on the tree and threw it in front of Bai-bai. Bai-bai was very surprised. He wanted to run to the tent to show off to his master. However, halfway through the run, his tail was tightly caught by the vines, and he could not run any further. Bai-bai looked back. At this time, the snake turned its head and bit Bai-bai's nose. Bai-bai was furious and shook it off. He pressed it with his claws and bit it into several pieces in a few seconds. He swallowed it. The food was so delicious that he forgot to show off in the tent. Chapter 120 Airplane. There was no flashlight in the tent, only the fire outside had a faint light reflected on the tent. Tong Xiangyu couldn't see Song-gu's face clearly, but she could hear his breathing rate, which was very different from before, rapid and urgent but restrained. Although Tong Xiangyu had taken the initiative many times before, now that Song-gu really had some ideas, she was too nervous. God knows what girls do with girls. I just kiss you. Song-gu's warm fingers had already touched Tong Xiangyu back, smooth and delicate. The touch was addictive. At the same time, Song-gu could also feel the unnatural slight stiffness under his skin. Song-gu said hoarsely, If you feel uncomfortable. Tong Xiangyu felt that Song-gu had stepped back when he said this. Without thinking, he grabbed her clothes first. I'm fine. Not nervous. But in fact, he didn't dare to breathe. Song-gu saw that she was not the only one who was nervous and embarrassed. She wanted to laugh but couldn't. Unlike Tong Xiangyu, Song-gu's vision was not affected in the dark. She could see the slender waist exposed by the clothes being lifted up, and the small and cute belly button. The underwear was slightly pushed up, and it was particularly soft. All of them were lovely. All of them were attractive. Song-gu kissed every inch of her skin devoutly as if worshipping her, feeling her nervous and sensitive trembling. So beautiful. Her little milk tea. Her little princess. Song-gu heard her heartbeat louder than the beating of a drum. Song-gu. Tong Xiangyu's voice was trembling. She shrank slightly, biting her fingers, and her breath was so soft and sticky. Song-gu used a lot of restraint to stop kissing her. His fingers touched her, reluctant to let go of every inch of her skin. In the end, she still held her bottom line, and couldn't bear to really cross the line. She wanted to give her little princess a chance to regret. The shelter was coming soon, and she couldn't take advantage of the situation. Song-gu thought he was restraining himself, but Tong Xiangyu felt that this was too stimulating. She nestled in Song-gu's arms, and she was so shy that she whimpered for a long time and refused to see anyone. Song-gu held her, and spent a lot of time calming down his impulses and the excessive and inappropriate things in his mind. When he woke up, it was already bright. The two of them had a simple breakfast and continued on their way. Chiao Mingshan and the others should have woken up. I don't know if they set off immediately. Even if they did, they might have taken a different route. So they didn't meet. In the next 2 days, Songge took Tong Xiangyu over mountains and ridges. On the third day, they finally walked out of the deep mountains and dense forests and saw the highway. Songge decisively took Tong Xiangyu to take the national and provincial roads, because there were no signs of damage caused by the meteorite group around. It seemed that this place had never experienced such a terrible natural disaster. Along the highway, Songge and Tong Xiangyu passed through several cities one after another. It was a pity that they did not find a car that could be driven. Instead, they encountered many mutated mice, cats, and dogs. Their bodies had increased several times, and their appearances were also strange. The same thing was that they were all very aggressive. The two even encountered a mutated mother cat giving birth, and a strong kitten that had just been born directly bit another thin kitten to death, starting from the neck, and then eating it. Tong Xiangyu only took a glance, and couldn't help frowning and looking away. Songge found a dilapidated pickup truck nearby, which was still drivable. The car key was inserted in it. There was not much gas, but it was enough for them to drive for a few days. If they were lucky, there would be gasoline in the gas stations along the way, and they might be able to rely on this pickup truck to find a shelter. The speed of the two people's progress finally made a qualitative leap. A week later, Songge drove. After nearly 2 hours of long provincial highway, Tong Xiangyu was drowsy in the passenger seat, and suddenly heard Bai shouting twice in great excitement, and she opened her eyes. The next city was just around the corner. Unlike the ones they had passed through before, this time, from a distance, they could see the tall red flags in the city, fluttering in the wind. Tong Xiangyu sat up in excitement and surprise. Have we reached the shelter? Songge took a look, and saw that there were no soldiers guarding the outskirts of the city. She said, not yet, but we should be close. Indeed, not yet. After entering the city, you can see that the streets are particularly empty. There were many corpses everywhere in the previous cities, but here, the streets had obviously been cleaned up, and there were bullet holes, shells, and traces of gunpowder on the road. Entering the city center, there are many bright red flags hanging high on the roadside, fluttering in the wind. But there are no people on the road, and no mutated animals. I have a feeling we're almost there. Tong Xiangyu was obviously relaxed and happy. She propped up her chin and looked out the window. It feels so kind to see the national flag. I feel at ease in an instant. Songge's fingers slightly clenched the steering wheel and replied, yeah. But we haven't arrived yet. In 2 days, we passed through 5 or 6 cities in total. The situation in each city is basically the same. Abandoned high-rise buildings, silent streets, countless bright red flags. There was still no one. You should drive in moderation, and not drive while tired. It is a waste of time to clean up a house that has not been occupied for a long time, and no one knows whether there are still monsters in it. So Songge always sets up a tent on the main road. There is nothing else anyway, and cuts some dead and barren greenery in the green belt to make a fire. It was the same today. It was getting dark, the tent was set up, and the fire was bright. Bai bit off a bunch of purple flowers from somewhere. The flowers were the size of coffee spoons, the leaves were fine and lush, and the petals were like mouths that kept wriggling. This is obviously a mutant plant. Bai presented flowers to Tong Xiangyu, and her tail was wagging vigorously. Although Tong Xiangyu was very kind, she could only watch from a distance. Songge picked up the strange bunch of flowers and looked at them. The flowers were densely packed and beautiful like corals on the seabed. But it was as if a sharp coral reef cut her hand. As soon as the blood came out, Songge felt numb. Not only was her hand numb, but her 5 senses were also affected. Songge felt that her vision became chaotic and her hearing was rapidly declining. At this moment, Tong Xiangyu shook her hard. Songge finally reacted and let go of her hand. Turning to look at her, Tong Xiangyu was very worried. Songge, are you okay? The paralysis lasted only for a short moment. Songge felt that she had recovered a lot now, and was about to say that she was fine. But suddenly, she heard something and looked up. Did you hear it? Tong Xiangyu also looked up. What? It seemed to be the sound of an airplane. Songge looked at the sky. Her eyesight had not fully recovered yet. She could not see clearly, so she was not sure. Maybe it was still the auditory hallucination caused by the influence of the mutant plant toxin. Tong Xiangyu eyes widened instantly. Plane? Really? Where is it? Tong Xiangyu tilted her neck, trying to find the flashing signal light in the dark clouds. But there was nothing. Song Ge listened again, and the sound had disappeared. He said, "Maybe I heard it wrong." After saying that, Song Ge kicked the bouquet into the fire. The flames instantly turned blue, and the burning flowers whistled. After a while, they quickly burned red and burned through like ordinary plants. After roasting a fire and having dinner, the two returned to the tent to rest and sleep. Half asleep, Tong Xiangyu was pushed awake by Song Ge. She squinted her eyes and opened them, and said vaguely, "Song Ge?" Song Ge lowered his voice. "There's something going on outside." Tong Xiangyu's sleepiness disappeared all of a sudden, and she sat up immediately, only to find that it was bright outside the tent without her knowing. Did another meteorite fall from the sky? Or were aliens coming? Tong Xiangyu panicked, and quickly picked up her coat and put it on and walked out of the tent with Song Ge. As soon as she walked out of the tent, she heard a clear paw, the huge propeller sound, and the bright and dazzling landing lights were facing us. The helicopter door opened, and two Special Forces soldiers with live ammunition jumped down from it. "Song Ge, Tong Xiangyu?" one of them shouted in a loud voice that seemed to have been smoked. Tong Xiangyu woke up as if from a dream, and said happily, "Yes. Yes. It's us." Tong Xiangyu answered happily with her lips curled up in her sleep. When the sound came out, Tong Xiangyu woke up and realized that she was waking up. Tong Xiangyu felt lost in her heart. Ah! It turned out to be a dream. Tong Xiangyu turned over lazily, but soon realized that something was wrong. She immediately opened her eyes and propped herself up to see that there was a soft white bed under her. Tong Xiangyu looked around and found a room with simple and warm decoration. "Song Ge?" Tong Xiangyu shouted, "Song Ge." The frosted glass door of the bathroom opened quickly, and Song Ge came out. She was steaming, wrapped in a bathrobe, and her hair was still dripping with water. Tong Xiangyu fell back on the big bed and stared at Song Ge blankly. "Am I still dreaming?" Chapter 121 Meeting. Song Ge, who came out in a hurry, was relieved to see that Tong Xiangyu was fine. He raised his hand and wiped her hair with a towel. The hair was not dripping much, and Song Ge walked to Tong Xiangyu, sat down beside the bed, and touched her red face. "What did you dream about?" Tong Xiangyu looked at Song Ge, blinked, and began to recall the fragments she remembered in confusion, and then said with wide eyes, "Isn't it a dream? We really arrived at the shelter?" Song Ge smiled. "Yes. Have you forgotten?" Tong Xiangyu was excited and curious, and asked Song Ge to confirm whether her memory was correct. "Did Captain Chiao send someone to rescue us?" Song Ge corrected, "It was a support." After they woke up, they contacted the people in the shelter through the radio. Tong Xiangyu still remembered that after opening the tent, the Special Forces soldiers with live ammunition stood in front of the helicopter, and the blades were spinning rapidly, making a loud noise. Her white hair was caught by a tightrope net. Although she anxiously explained that although Bai Bai was a mutant dog, he was intelligent, it was useless. The Special Forces did their job impartially, and put Bai Bai into a dog cage made of special materials. Tong Xiangyu, by the way, where is Bai Bai? Song Ge, they took him for testing, and he hasn't come back yet. Tong Xiangyu knew there was still hope when she heard it. At least they didn't plan to kill Bai Bai indiscriminately. Tong Xiangyu looked around again, and her expression was much more relaxed. "It seems that Captain Chiao and his team arrived earlier than us." "No," Song Ge said, "they are still in the mountains. A team went to meet them. We haven't met them yet." Tong Xiangyu nodded. "So that's how it is." Song Ge saw a light sleep mark on Tong Xiangyu's face, and he reached out and stroked it for a while. Then Song Ge stood up and said, "I have something to do, and I have to go out later. If you don't want to sleep, you can get up and take a good bath." Tong Xiangyu grabbed her hand and looked up at her. "Where are you going?" Song Ge, "Meet an acquaintance." Tong Xiangyu blinked her eyes, thinking that she had only slept for a short while. How come Song Ge had acquaintances in the shelter, and immediately asked, "Can I go too?" Song Ge thought for a moment and said, "Sure, I'm going to ask about your parents anyway." Tong Xiangyu immediately got out of bed and ran to take a shower. The bathroom had just been used by Song Ge, and it was still steaming. Bright lights, mirror covered with fog, Tong Xiangyu felt the warm and real temperature of the hot water from the shower falling on her skin. She opened her eyes in the water. It was not a dream. They are really safe. Song Ge was waiting by the door, hearing the noise. He stopped, looked up, and was stunned. Tong Xiangyu wore a white shirt with pearl sleeves and high-waisted jeans. Her blow-dried hair was tied up into a cute and playful bun, revealing her slender and white neck. A beautiful lady in the world. Even though she had gone through so much hardship, she still smiled slightly, giving people the feeling that she was still the beautiful fairy who seemed to be out of touch with the world. Song Ge stared at her. Tong Xiangyu suddenly felt a little embarrassed, lowered her head, and fiddled with a thin silk ribbon on her sleeves. What? Is it strange to wear it? No. It looks good. Song Ge came to his senses and stood up straight, reaching out his hand to her. Come here. Tong Xiangyu bit her lip lightly and put her hand into Song Ge's palm. When they were leaving, Song Ge told Tong Xiangyu that the country's shelter was built on the outskirts of the capital, but 200 or 300 meters underground. Tong Xiangyu couldn't believe it. What would a city built underground look like? When she walked out of the hotel and saw it with her own eyes, Tong Xiangyu felt even more incredible. Because if Song Ge hadn't told her in advance that it was underground, she wouldn't have noticed anything unusual. A simulated sun overhead, blue sky and white clouds. Looking around, high-rise buildings, driveways, moats, military uniforms standing guard everywhere on the streets, and many ordinary people coming and going. It was like a peaceful, busy city that had not experienced any disasters. The cult community base of Zeus, who wanted to use every inch of land, was not even as good as the fingernails here. Sunlight, electricity, water, and even the communication network that Song Ge had just called were all good. Tong Xiangyu murmured, "This is not like a refuge base that can be built in a year or two." The monster virus broke out quickly and violently. The first to fall were the grassroots laborers. In a short period of time, they not only had to take refuge, but also stabilize people's hearts. The subsequent human and material resources, as well as the right time and place, were all problems. Song Ge immediately confirmed Tong Xiangyu murmured yes, saying, "Yes, this shelter was built more than 10 years ago, and it is maintained every year. This is the first time it is fully open and put into use." Song Ge said what Mo Xiao told her. Mo Xiao, the highest-ranking policeman who brought Song Ge's parents' ashes back then, was also the one who arranged her life for more than 10 years. Now he has been promoted to vice-state level. Tong Xiangyu fell asleep when the helicopter landed last night. And Song Ge, after the cabin door was opened, saw the long-lost Uncle Mo. The other party asked her about the thrilling experiences during her escape, and then recalled her parents' heroic deeds with emotion, and finally talked about the general situation of the shelter now. Viruses and natural disasters have caused the number of mutated animals and plants around the world to increase, which has directly affected the survival and safety of mankind. Fortunately, many people's bodies have also evolved and awakened their superpowers. So the country immediately established a new military branch, which is specifically used to strangle and eliminate these dangerous species, and search and rescue survivors across the country. Although it has been a long time since the disaster broke out, people are still being rescued one after another. This is almost entirely due to a heavy rainstorm that lasted for 2 months 4 years ago. At that time, the death toll from various flood disasters reached a terrifying and astonishing hundreds of thousands. After that, many people became aware of the crisis, and those with money and power were more able to build safe houses and shelters for storing food and goods. However, those who were truly powerful and influential were arranged to be relocated as soon as the disaster broke out. But many people still died during the transfer. As for the development of the virus vaccine, Mo Xiao told Song Ge that the most authoritative doctors and pharmacists in the country, the medical research and development team, are all here and have been researching virus-specific drugs and vaccines, but the results are minimal, not to mention the huge side effects of the drugs, and they cannot really produce resistance in the body for a long time. The main difficulty at present is that it is not only the animals and plants that are mutating, but human genes are also evolving. Song Ge showed the certificate given by Mo Xiao. The police officer saluted her, and then led Song Ge and Tong Xiangyu into a heavily guarded building. The building was divided into various areas according to the nature of the work. When Tong Xiangyu took the elevator, she saw many researchers in white coats, with serious expressions, and hurriedly holding experimental data. Tong Xiangyu couldn't help but get nervous. She thought she could rest assured after finding a shelter, But now it seems that the future of their human race is still unknown. And there is still a long way to go. Song-gu was taken to Imo Zhao's office. Someone was talking inside. The police officer raised his hand and knocked on the door to report. The talking in the office stopped. A voice came out, "Come in." The police officer opened the door and asked the two of you to come in. Song-gu walked into the office and saw Imo Zhao first. And then saw another middle-aged couple who were well-dressed and had unique temperaments. Song-gu took a closer look. Tong Xiangyu on Song-gu right got a view and was stunned for a moment. Then she let go of Song-gu's hand and rushed over crying. "Mom! Dad!" Song-gu originally wanted to ask Uncle Imo about Tong Xiangyu parents. After all, in the past 10 months, mankind has almost suffered a catastrophe. In the face of viruses and natural disasters, a person will not have an extra life just because he is rich and powerful, or a certain richest man. In the face of death, everyone is equal. But Song-gu did not expect that the eldest daughter was lucky. And so were her parents, and they actually survived. They were also called by Uncle Imo. Song-gu put her hands in her pockets, and saw that her eldest daughter had burst into tears in an instant. And the two elders also hugged her and cried bitterly. Song-gu turned her eyes away. In such a family reunion, she was just an outsider. Imo Zhao saw it, stood up and walked to Song-gu, raised his hand, and patted her shoulder comfortingly. Song-gu turned her head and looked at him. Song-gu had long accepted the reality that her parents had sacrificed. She was used to it, and could be very calm. In the past, she would have walked away and refused such useless, even in her opinion, hypocritical comfort. But now, Song-gu did not leave. Song-gu tacitly accepted the comfort brought by Imo Zhao. Not as the leader of her parents, but as an elder. Tong Xiangyu vented all the emotions of fear, sadness, grievance, fear, and joy in her heart. Her eyes were swollen from crying. She raised her hand to wipe her tears, and began to introduce Song-gu to her parents. I don't know how much Song-ji's uncle told her parents. Tong Xiangyu kept emphasizing that it was Song-gu who saved her. Without Song-gu, she would have died long ago. Seeing that the two elders were about to rush towards her emotionally, Song-gu immediately took a half step back. But the next moment, Imo Zhao raised his hand to secretly stop him. Song-gu then came to his senses and stopped avoiding. Song-gu accepted the couple's thanks calmly. But when they were about to kneel down, Song-gu quickly bent down to support them. Uncle and aunt, don't do this. It's over like this. Song-gu was very strong and didn't make them kneel successfully. He said, Xiangyu and I were classmates. Not only did I save her, she also saved me. We helped each other along the way. After saying that, Song-gu looked up and looked at Tong Xiangyu for help. She felt guilty and anxious when she thought about it now. After all, she had led their lost and recovered precious daughter astray. How could she accept these thanks again? Tong Xiangyu did not help Song-gu out. She wiped her tears and winked at Song-gu, just wanting to take the opportunity to improve Song-gu's favorability in front of her parents, saying, Song-gu, don't be modest and deny it. If it weren't for you, I would have died hundreds of times. It's normal for my parents to want to thank you. Song-gu, this naughty little traitor. Tong Yulin and Lu Yao believed their youngest daughter's words without a doubt. After all, the 3 children they had before were all sons. They finally had a daughter. The whole family treated her like a treasure. They were afraid that she would melt if they put her in their mouths, or drop her if they held her in their hands. She was spoiled since she was young. She rarely got sick from bumps. The violent rabies virus broke out. During that time when the internet was still connected, they saw the terrible scenes of the outbreak across the country in the news. They ate people alive. It spread like a plague. There were corpses everywhere. It was millions of times bloodier than what was filmed in the movies. In such a dangerous and terrifying situation, Song-gu took their daughter out of school, escaped from Kuching, and went through many difficulties and dangers to the shelter. What else could he do except treat her like a treasure? So he insisted on kneeling. Fortunately, the situation did not last long. Imo Zhao was very busy. His assistant came to remind him that there was a meeting coming up. So he took the initiative to smooth things over and asked for dinner. Lu Yao and Tong Yulin and his wife also had their own jobs in the shelter. They were also very busy and agreed immediately. Lu Yao held her daughter's hand again, smiling with tears in her eyes, wiping away her tears happily and saying, Mom will have someone clean up the room later, and you can come back to sleep tonight. Tong Xiangyu was stunned, and said to her mother hesitantly, Don't bother Mom. Song-gu and I will stay in the hotel. Song-gu said, you can stay with your aunt first. Tong Xiangyu froze instantly, holding her mother's hand tightly, looking up at Song-gu with a helpless expression. Song-gu? Song-gu comforted her, saying, it just so happens that I have a lot of examinations to do in the next few days, and I can't take care of you. Tong Xiangyu pursed her lips and wanted to say something, but forced herself to hold it back. Okay then. Chapter 122. Song-gu had her own considerations. Now the shelter has been found, and the eldest lady was also lucky enough to find her parents in the shelter. Then she was left. She needed to figure out the vine that was parasitic on her body. Oh, the eldest lady said it was not parasitic, but supernatural power. Song-gu had done many physical examinations on the night of arriving at the shelter, even more than a dozen blood draws. But the results were not out yet. There were still many more examinations to come. Song-gu needed to avoid certain foods, so the dinner was postponed for 2 days. So at night, Song-gu was the only one left in the room. It seemed that the two had never parted while awake. Song-gu lay on the big bed, letting the vines shake their tiny leaves like an octopus to search for the remaining scent of Tong Xiangyu on the bedding. Bright lights, comfortable temperature. Compared to living in the open air, the conditions here are a million times better. But Song-gu tossed and turned in bed for a long time, but he couldn't fall asleep, got up and found some fitness equipment to consume his energy, and took a simple shower, and went back to the bedroom to sleep more than an hour later. This time, she fell asleep as she wished, but in a half-awake state. Song-gu smelled a familiar fragrance. Her arms felt warm and soft, and as her fingers moved, she felt smooth and delicate like silk. Song-gu breathing became heavier unconsciously. She opened her eyes slightly. The bedroom was dark, but it did not hinder Song-gu vision. She could see the familiar and beautiful little face. But Song-gu knew that Tong Xiangyu was staying at her parents' house tonight, and it would be like this for many days to come. Song-gu thought it was a dream. He held Tong Xiangyu's wrist and pressed it over her head. Then he turned over and kissed her lips, chin, and thin neck. Tong Xiangyu trembled all over and moaned softly. Song-gu was moved by her. With a light tap of his fingertips, a circle of vines bound the slender wrist and fixed it to the head of the bed. Song-gu continued to move down, kissing her beautiful collarbone, soft ups and downs, and slender waist. Song-gu. Tong Xiangyu made a shy and trembling voice, and she kept her legs together, and was nervous and shy about what was going to happen next, but also had a bit of helpless desire. Song-gu's fingers had already hooked on the thin lace fabric, and when he heard the voice, he paused slightly, and instantly came to his senses, and looked up again. Tong Xiangyu's hands were tied, her cheeks were red with tears, and she looked very pitiful. It made people want to abuse her, and make her cry. Fuck. Song-gu cursed in his heart, put down Tong Xiangyu's pajamas that were lifted up high, turned over and left, and raised his hand to touch her forehead. Song-gu said helplessly, how did you get here? His voice was still a little hoarse. Song-gu turned on the light, and sure enough, the young lady on the bed did not disappear. Her beautiful face was as red as a ripe apple. Tong Xiangyu said in a coquettish voice, Open the door to come in. That's not what I'm asking. Song-gu knew that Tong Xiangyu had a room card, and asked, do your parents know that you came out? Tong Xiangyu turned over, hugged Song-gu, and bent one leg to press on her, groaning and shaking her head. Song-gu, what if they find out that you are missing in the middle of the night and worry about you? Tong Xiangyu, I will go back in a while. Song-gu was confused by the actions of this young lady, but it is undeniable that there were surprises and joys. However, this experience of being teased halfway was not so pleasant. Song-gu touched Tong Xiangyu's thin waist with his fingers, and then lowered his head to smell the pleasant fragrance of her hair. Tong Xiangyu didn't know what Song-gu was thinking. She just grumbled a little aggrieved. Song-gu, you are still mean to me. I'm not mean to you. Song-gu sighed, stretched out his hand to hug her to himself. The slightly heavy weight made it feel more real. Song-gu saw that Tong Xiangyu was really aggrieved. Whispered to her teasing, then you came to my bed in the middle of the night. What is this? Is it an affair? Tong Xiangyu was thin-skinned. Her face turned red after what she said. She pinched Song-gu's waist coquettishly. No. I came to meet my girlfriend. Song-gu smiled, bent down and kissed her. The two kissed for a long time. Tong Xiangyu wrapped her legs around Song-gu's waist, making a coquettish and seductive humming sound. Song-gu's fingers went down, pinched Tong Xiangyu's soft and delicate buttocks, and went down again. Tong Xiangyu suddenly shuddered slightly, her ears instantly turned red, her body twisted, and the sound in her throat was also sticky. Song-gu seemed to be fascinated, lightly holding her red earrings, moving cautiously with his hands, and coaxing, "Shh." The two of them had their first taste. And they messed around until almost dawn. Tong Xiangyu had no strength left. Song-gu carried her back. "I don't want to be separated from you. Song-gu." Tong Xiangyu whispered coquettishly against Song-gu's neck. Song-gu coaxed, "Soon. Wait until the inspection is over. If the inspection goes well, you will be assigned a house. There are two types of accommodation in the shelter. One is the hotel resettlement room, like Song-gu is living in now. And the other is the dormitory building in the community allocated by the government. The former is for ordinary civilian survivors. And the second is for people who have a proper job or a higher position in the shelter. For example, Mo Xiao and Tong Xiangyu parents. If Song-gu passes the examination, he will apply to Mo Xiao and join the new military branch's superpower advanced team. At that time, he will have the opportunity to be assigned a house of his own. Having a house means a sense of belonging. A temporary hotel is nothing. However, even if he has a house, Song-gu has no reason to let Tong Xiangyu come and live with him. They haven't told their elders about their relationship yet. Song-gu didn't know what to say. So, maybe they have to continue this kind of affair. Life for a while. Take it one step at a time. First pass the examination. What if she is unlucky? She is not a superpower but a mutation, let alone a new house. She will be directly locked up in jail, waiting to be a subject of medical experiments. In the next 2 days, Song-gu ran back and forth between the hotel and the hospital, doing examinations, waiting for the report results. When Lu Yao went out in the morning, she remembered that the breakfast was still in the pot, and forgot to turn off the fire, so she hurried home. As soon as she entered the door, she saw her daughter walking out with a bag on her back, and she looked a little hurried. Lu Yao was stunned for a moment, and asked, "Yu, where are you going so early in the morning?" Before leaving, she saw that her daughter was still sleeping. Tong Xiangyu didn't expect her mother to come back suddenly. She was embarrassed for a while, and then honestly confessed, "I'm going to the hospital. Song-gu checkup is the last day today, and I want to accompany her." Lu Yao said, "There are people to accompany her during the checkup, so you don't need to accompany her. You can rest for a while, and your mother will take you to the research institute to study in the afternoon." Tong Xiangyu pinched the strap of her bag, and said she knew, but she couldn't help looking at the door eagerly. How could Lu Yao not know what her daughter was thinking? Seeing her eager to leave, she remembered how she had been absent-minded during meals these past 2 days. Lu Yao said, "Mom knows that you have a good relationship with Song-gu. Thanks to her, you were able to return home safely. But after entering the shelter, you have to put these friendships aside. Everyone is working hard for the future of mankind and shining in their respective fields. She is not good at studying, but she is good at physical training. She will most likely join the action team." Tong Xiangyu denied in her heart that I was not friendly with her, but she was distracted by what she heard. She asked in confusion, "Action team? Advanced team? Patrol team? Etc." Lu Yao said, "Isn't she doing a special ability screening? If the result is not a big problem, it will be a matter of time before she joins the team. You won't see her for 3 to 5 days." Tong Xiangyu was stunned. After a long while, she asked, "Does Song-gu know it herself?" Lu Yao, "Yes. Secretary Mo will definitely tell her." Tong Xiangyu remembered that Song-gu had not told her anything. She lowered her eyes and responded softly, putting down her bag. "Lu Yao, aren't you going out?" Tong Xiangyu, "Well, anyway, she's doing the checkup alone these 2 days. It doesn't matter whether I go or not." Seeing her depressed, Lu Yao said, "Mom knows that your classmate Song-gu, both parents are drug enforcement police, but they died, right?" Tong Xiangyu was startled, looking at her mother in surprise. "Mom, how did you know?" "I heard about it from your class teacher." Lu Yao said, "At the parents' meeting, all the parents were there, but her seat was vacant. Some people also complained that she was a bad influence in the class, and her grades were too bad." Tong Xiangyu couldn't help getting angry when she heard this, and defended her. "What bad influence? Song-gu parents are heroes of the people. Let's talk about the facts. No matter whether her parents are heroes of the people or not, at school, she has bad grades and a bad personality. It's normal that other parents don't like her." Lu Yao touched her daughter's hair and said, "Of course, Mom is very grateful to her. If it weren't for her, how could you come back unscathed? Tong Seong-yu was still unhappy. Song-gu had a hard time. She rented a small semi-basement by herself, which was not even half the size of our bathroom. Liu Yao saw her genuine grievance and coaxed her. Everyone has different experiences and different personalities. I used to hear those parents say that Song-gu was not good, and I had some preconceived opinions. But this time I found that she is a very good child. Tong Seong-yu's eyes lit up. Really? Liu Yao smiled. Of course it's true. Tong Seong-yu's heart moved. But she didn't dare to say it directly. She just couldn't help but feel happy. I want to eat breakfast. It's in the pot. Do you know how to turn off the fire? I know. I know, Mom. You go to work. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Song-gu finished the last examination and left the hospital. The sunrise and sunset of this underground refuge city are very accurate. At 4 o'clock, it was just sunset. West. Song-gu walked out of the hospital gate with his hands in his pockets. Suddenly he noticed something. He turned his head and saw Chiao Mingshan, Qin Nan and his group walking over while chatting. Song-gu hesitated for a moment and then stood still. Chiao Mingshan and the others looked over and saw Song-gu. They were surprised and delighted. Song-gu? Song-gu also greeted him. Captain Chiao. Chiao Mingshan looked behind Song-gu. Why are you the only one here? Where's Xiaoyu? She doesn't need to be checked. Song-gu had never revealed that Tong Seong-yu had superpowers. Judging from Mo Zhao's attitude towards Tong Seong-yu, Chiao Mingshan didn't seem to have mentioned this to the shelter. A police officer nearby reminded them. Chiao Mingshan wanted to catch up with Song-gu. But he said, we still need to go for a physical examination. So, let's have dinner together tonight. Invite Xiaoyu. Song-gu, I asked her. Tong Seong-yu was also very happy to know that Captain Chiao and his team had escaped and entered the shelter. That night, they made an appointment in the Chinese restaurant on the first floor of the hotel where Song-gu was staying. Chiao Mingshan, we all breathed a sigh of relief when we learned that you had arrived at the shelter safely 2 days ago. Tong Seong-yu thanked him. Thanks to you, Captain, for finding someone to pick us up. No, I heard you were already there. Chiao Mingshan said. Zhou Bo said you two were fine. I didn't believe it at first. Alas, no one expected Sister Huang to do such an extreme thing. Tong Seong-yu heard him mention Sister Huang, sighed, lowered her eyes. She was also because of Shuja. Don't say those things that spoil the fun. Qin Nan pushed the sunglasses on his nose, smiled and said, the best thing is that everyone can get to the shelter safely. It's time to eat and drink, come. Cheers. Everyone, cheers. Cheers. Xiang Weijun sat in the second seat to the right of Tong Seong-yu, holding a wine glass, asked Tong Seong-yu through Fong Fong. Have you found your parents? Yes. Tong Seong-yu nodded, pursed her lips and smiled. Lucky, they are all fine. Xiang Weijun, that's really lucky. I must visit my uncle and aunt someday. Tong Seong-yu didn't respond, just smiled politely, and said, you will be busy in the future. Right. A new military branch has been established in the shelter. After your abilities have been checked and found to be okay, you should be able to join the new team. When Song-gu heard this, his hand holding the chopsticks paused slightly, and turned to look at Tong Seong-yu. Tong Seong-yu didn't look at Song-gu, and seemed to be just chatting with Xiang Weijun casually. Xiang Weijun nodded. There is such a saying, how to join the team specifically depends on the future situation. The meal was a little late, but fortunately, the hotel where Captain Chiao and his team stayed was next door, not far away. After the show, Tong Seong-yu and Song-gu returned to the room. But no one spoke. After a while, Tong Seong-yu suddenly said in a sulky tone, then I go back too. My parents are waiting for me. Song-gu grabbed her wrist and said, don't. Tong Seong-yu looked back at Song-gu. Song-gu paused for a moment and asked, are you angry? Tong Seong-yu asked back, why should I be angry? Song-gu remembered that she had been talking to Xiang Weijun tonight, and didn't pay much attention to herself. So she explained, I didn't mean to hide it from you on purpose. Tong Seong-yu looked at Song-gu and said, my mother said that if you join the team, you often can't come back for 10 days or half a month. And it's very dangerous. Song-gu took his hand back and said, it depends on the results of the examination. This is the best outcome. Your examination results must be fine. Tong Seong-yu frowned and said, but I don't want to worry about you every day. Song-gu said, since you are here, you can't just eat and wait for death and waste resources. Besides, if there is a position, you can be allocated a house. And you can move in. When Tong Xiangyu heard this, she gently tapped the seam of her pants with her fingertips and asked, "What if my mother asks me why I don't live at home and come to live with you?" Song Ge was silent. Tong Xiangyu was not angry before. She was just pretending. She stepped forward, held Song Ge's hand and said expectantly and nervously, "Song Ge, my mother actually has a good impression of you. She likes you very much. Can we tell her? She will definitely not object." Song Ge frowned and did not agree. Tong Xiangyu called her, "Song Ge." Song Ge looked up at her and said, "Wait for the test results to come out." Tong Xiangyu was a little angry when she saw that she didn't answer directly. What if the test results are not good? Song Ge, leave the shelter. Tong Xiangyu heard her answer so quickly and decisively. Obviously she had thought about it thousands of times, and she was anxious for a moment, and her eyes were red. "If you leave, what about me?" Song Ge laughed. "Steal you away?" Tong Xiangyu was anxious and angry, but when she heard Song Ge's words, she couldn't hold back her tears and laughed. "Really?" Song Ge thought that if I was in a dangerous situation, I might mutate and lose my mind at any time, and I could not be taken in by the shelter. Then this must be a lie. But Song Ge did not say anything. Song Ge just smiled gently, took Tong Xiangyu's wrist and pulled her in front of him. "As long as you are willing, I will take you away." Song Ge looked down at her, tilted his head, and kissed her earlobe and cheek, and hugged her waist. "Don't go back yet. I will take you later." Chapter 123. It was already 1 in the middle of the night when I sent Tong Xiangyu back. Song Ge returned to the hotel. He was not too sleepy yet. He stood in front of the building and enjoyed the breeze for a while. At night in the underground city, there were stars to be seen. If there was no knife hanging on his neck, this night would have been very beautiful. It was a pity that there was a knife hanging. Song Ge was actually not afraid of anything when he was very young, because he had nothing and had nothing to lose. But now that he had it again, he began to experience again fear of loss. Xian Jufu. This feeling is really not pleasant, but without this feeling, she would be as miserable as before. Song Ge did not look at it for long, turned and went into the hotel. The next day, the physical examination report came out. More than a dozen copies were sent to Mo Xiao. Song Ge received the notice and waited in Mo Xiao's office early in the morning. Mo Xiao did not come alone. In addition to the assistant, there was also a tall and strong middle-aged man beside him. The man was wearing a dark green military uniform, with stars and tassels on his shoulders, and his face was serious and serious. When the man saw Song Ge, he still didn't quite believe it. He frowned and said, "You are the one with the ability of the plant system?" Whether it's the momentum or the tone of his voice, he seems to be very important. Song Ge answered neither humbly nor arrogantly, "If the mutant vines count, show them, and let us see." Song Ge looked at Mo Xiao. Mo Xiao introduced him in time. "This is General Li. Just listen to him." Song Ge no longer hesitated and released the vines. The vines quickly entangled from thin to thick, following the various requests made by the general. Song Ge controlled the vines one by one to do them, until the vines changed from their original plant form to blades, becoming sharp, and could cut through iron like mud. General Li walked to Song Ge, patted her shoulder in approval. 18 years old? Song Ge, yes. Young people are formidable. General Li couldn't help but sigh. So far, the mutation process caused by plant infection is extremely painful, and only a handful of people can survive. He looked at Song Ge and said, "Are you a girl afraid of going to the battlefield, fighting those mutated plants and animals?" Song Ge said, "That's how I fought my way here." General Li knew that Mo Xiao had told him that his question was meant to be specific. "You have only seen a few. The real situation outside is much more terrible than what you have experienced." Song Ge understood what the general meant, which meant that her physical examination report passed, and she had passed the interview just now. Next, she had to consider which special power team to put her in. In the eyes of others, this was a great honor. Song Ge did not agree immediately, but asked, "Do you want to allocate houses?" General Li was stunned. Mo Xiao knew what Song Ge cared about, laughed, and said, "Allocated? Which community do you want? Which building? Which building? I will ask someone to bring a booklet for you to choose." "Okay." Song Ge got the answer he wanted, and then he looked at General Li, and saluted very standardly on the spot, with a firm look. "Report to the chief. I'm not afraid. Walked out of the building. Song-gu stood still, looking up at the sun. She was not afraid of what the outside world would become, because she had no home when she was very young. But it was different now. She wanted to have a home in this place. Holding the floor plan manual tightly in her hand, Song-gu went directly to Tong Seong-yu parents' house and knocked on the door. No one. Song-gu knocked again. But still no one. Song-gu was not anxious. Nor did she leave, but stood outside the door and waited. Time passed slowly. The sun sets, night quietly arrives, the temperature gradually gets colder, and the street lights along the street light up accordingly. Song-gu felt as if she was still in the city on the ground. Just then, she heard footsteps and voices coming from far away. Tong Yulin, your mother and I will go up first, Yu. Will you send Seobin off, or go out for dinner with him? Tong Seong-yu was reluctant. I'm cold, I don't want to go out for dinner. It's a bit cold at night, but we still have to go out during the day. Tong Yulin said, let's do this. The day after tomorrow is a weekend. Seobin Yu. Tong Seong-yu interrupted and said, oh, I forgot that I didn't buy anything. Mom and Dad. You go home first. I'm going out for a while now. Tong Yulin, what do you want to buy? Let Seobin take it to you. Yu, I take it to you. A strange young man's voice also echoed in time. Song-gu hand holding the manual moved slightly, and he walked out of the shadows directly, and walked into the field of vision of the people who were talking. Lu Yao suddenly saw her, and was surprised. Student Song? Tong Seong-yu, who had found an excuse to get out of the current depressing and annoying situation, was also surprised to see Song-gu. Song-gu? Why are you here? When did you come? Song-gu did not respond to the two of them, and his eyes fell on the young man standing next to Tong Seong-yu. The man looked to be in his 20s, tall and thin, wearing a white shirt, gold-rimmed glasses, and was very polite. This is a researcher in my mother's institute. Tong Seong-yu saw where Song-gu's eyes were, and hurriedly ran to Song-gu, hugged her arm, and explained. Song-gu whispered, yeah. When the other party looked at her, Song-gu had already withdrawn his gaze without emotion, and then turned to look at Tong Seong-yu's mother Lu Yao. Song-gu smiled slightly, and said politely, Auntie, I made an appointment for dinner in Uncle Mo's office before. You won't blame me for coming uninvited. Right? Lu Yao reacted, and hurriedly smiled and said, no. No. How could it be? You said you had a dinner with friends yesterday. I thought about making an appointment in 2 days. Tong Yulin took out his cell phone. Did I book a restaurant now? Song-gu said, Uncle, don't bother. If you don't mind, can we eat at your house? Song-gu, it's just a token of my appreciation. Lu Yao smiled and said, okay. Okay. Yulin, you go buy some groceries. Seobin, stay and finish the meal. Chen Wenbin was about to agree. Tong Seong-yu pulled her mother's sleeve in time, and persuaded in a low voice that everyone could hear, Mom, it's not appropriate. Isn't this a special thank you for saving my dinner? Chen Wenbin heard this, and did not show any embarrassment. He smiled and said, thank you, Professor Lu. But I have an experiment waiting for data today. How about another day? Lu Yao said, okay. Data is important. Tong Yulin went to buy vegetables. Song-gu entered Tong Seong-yu's bedroom. After staying for a few days, the bedroom smelled good. It was the pleasant body fragrance of Tong Seong-yu. Song-gu sat on Tong Seong-yu's bed. Tong Seong-yu sat down beside her and leaned against her stickily. She felt a little worried and unnatural, and said, Song-gu, don't get me wrong. That person just now. Song-gu, your parents want to bring you together? Tong Seong-yu shook her head quickly. Don't worry, I don't have any thoughts at all. I feel so annoyed. What else do you want to think about? Song-gu gave her the booklet in his hand. Tong Seong-yu took it, confused. What is this? Take a look. House? Tong Seong-yu opened it and looked. Her eyes lit up instantly, looking at Song-gu. Have you got the results of your examination? Song-gu smiled. Yeah. Tong Seong-yu looked at the house, and then at Song-gu's expression, knowing the result, and was happy for Song-gu. It looks good? Yes. Song-gu looked at Tong Seong-yu smiling. Obedient and beautiful face, came over and kissed her mouth, held her waist and said, because we, little milk tea, are very lucky, I can't do it by myself. Tong Seong-yu was happy, and took Song-gu and kissed him back. This way, Song-gu didn't have to leave the shelter, and didn't have to sneak out with him, and live a wandering and precarious life outside. This is a great thing. Song-gu kissed Tong Seong-yu and unconsciously hugged her to his legs, and his hand also touched the hem of her clothes. Tong Seong-yu's lips were sucked red, and her eyes were misty, looking delicate and seductive. Song-gu had to endure it, so as not to continue to do bad things. Their foreheads were close together. Song-gu said to Tong Seong-yu, "Which house do you like? The layout and the location. Pick a few, and we will take a look tomorrow." Tong Seong-yu couldn't help being shy and happy. Her feet dangling in the air swayed gently. She leaned on Song-gu's shoulder, bit her lip and smiled. "It feels like choosing a new house. Song-gu, just pick a new house, our home." Tong Seong-yu was touched, looking up at Song-gu. Song-gu looked down at her, no longer smiling, but asked seriously, "Little milk tea, are you willing to give me a home?" Tong Seong-yu's nose felt sour, and her eyes became hot, and she hugged Song-gu tightly. I am willing, I am willing." In the kitchen, Lu Yao heard her daughter's excited voice, and was cooking with a spatula, confused. "Yu, what's wrong?" Tong Seong-yu responded loudly, "Mom, I'm fine." After Tong Seong-yu responded to her mother, she looked at Song-gu, blinking her big eyes. Impatiently, "When should we tell my parents?" Song-gu, "No hurry. Take your time." Tong Seong-yu frowned, "But, for a situation like today, I believe our college bully can handle it completely." "Right?" Tong Seong-yu pouted. Of course she can handle it. But she was still a little unhappy. Tong Seong-yu hugged Song-gu's waist and leaned against her, muttering softly, "Why don't you give me a name? Do you want me to be your concubine who can't see the light of day for the rest of my life?" Song-gu laughed. "How could it be? Who would be willing to hide such a beautiful concubine at home?" Tong Seong-yu pouted unhappily. "You?" But Tong Seong-yu said, "But forget it. I listen to you." Song-gu hugged Tong Seong-yu, bent down and kissed her forehead. But his eyes were quiet and dark. In a situation like tonight, it doesn't matter whether Tong Seong-yu can handle it. Song-gu doesn't want to see it again. Flies are flying around her beautiful little flower. Even if the little flower doesn't pay attention, the scene is enough to annoy her. Lu Yao has prepared the meal and asked her daughter and Song-gu to come out to eat. Although Tong Yulin is the richest man in Kiching, he is usually busy with work and can't take care of his family. Now that he is in the shelter, he has time to learn to help his wife in the kitchen. The couple prepared a sumptuous dinner. Song-gu saved their precious daughter. This was a great favor. One meal was not enough to repay her. Song-gu's parents were no longer around. They discussed, since Yu had a good relationship with her, why not just take Song-gu as their goddaughter? If Song-gu didn't mind, it would be best to say this when the dinner was almost over. Lu Yao spoke up. Tong Yulin acted according to the situation. Whenever Song-gu was a little unhappy or offended, he would immediately speak up to smooth things over and let the matter go. The dinner was so sumptuous. Song-gu was surprised when he saw it. "Auntie, you cooked all this? Show off your cooking skills. I love to cook." Lu Yao smiled and said, "Hurry up and sit down. Try it and see if it suits your taste. If you like it, come often. Auntie will cook for you." The dishes included simple home-cooked dishes and the 8 major cuisines. Song-gu saw the serving chopsticks on the table and used them to pick up a piece of vinegar fish and put it in his bowl. The dishes cooked by Lu Yao not only look impressive, but also taste better than the Chinese food cooked by the hotel chef. Song-gu was not a greedy person, but he praised her flatteringly. "It's delicious. I haven't eaten such delicious and tasty dishes for a long time." "Then eat more." Seeing that she liked it, Lu Yao was also happy, and simply brought the plate of fish to Song-gu. Seeing this, Tong Seong-yu deliberately said, "Song-gu, my mother treats you better than me. I'm jealous." Lu Yao couldn't help laughing. And just when she was about to coax her daughter, and put her favorite pineapple sweet and sour pork in front of her, she saw Song-gu said, "Don't be jealous." Song-gu picked out the fish bones, dipped the tender fish meat in the soup, and put it on Tong Seong-yu's rice bowl. "Here you go." Tong Seong-yu was satisfied, hummed coquettishly, and picked up the fish meat to eat. Lu Yao and Tong Yulin were both stunned. Everyone knew that their daughter was a germaphobe in this regard. And the chopsticks that Song-gu used to pick up the fish were not public chopsticks. The couple looked at each other. Then, picking up food happened frequently. Seeing that Song-gu didn't eat much, he was only busy taking care of his daughter Yu. Lu Yao pretended to put on a stern face and blamed him. Yu, how can you order Song-gu around like this?" Tong Yulin also said, "You didn't act so spoiled all the way to the shelter. Did you?" Tong Xiangyu had long been accustomed to being like this with Songge, and didn't think there was anything wrong with the scale. When she heard her parents say this, she realized that she had to restrain herself and apologize immediately. Songge said, "Auntie, uncle, it's okay. This is what I should do." Lu Yao looked at Songge with a smile. "Why should I do this? You are just classmates. You spoil her big lady temper. It's because you have a good temper. Uncle and aunt really don't know how to thank you." Songge lowered his eyes, continued to pick the bones on the fish in the bowl, and said, "It's not just classmates." Tong Xiangyu was stunned and looked at Songge. Lu Yao and Tong Yulin were also stunned. Not just classmates? What is that? Friends? Chapter 124 I Like You finale. Lu Yao and Tong Yulin both thought Songge was just being polite. But after Songge put down his chopsticks, he looked at the two of them and said, "Xiangyu probably didn't tell you in detail about the day when the monster virus broke out." Songge, a monster virus broke out in the school. The monster attacked people indiscriminately. We were locked in the classroom. The front and back doors were blocked. But the monster was very strong and broke in. Lu Yao was slightly stunned and listened very carefully. Then what? Tong Xiangyu took over and said, everyone was very scared at the time. But they didn't know the situation was so critical. Only Songge opened the anti-theft window, tore the curtains into strips, and tied them up, and jumped out of the window. Tong Yulin, jumping out of the window? That's so dangerous. Lu Yao was also surprised. But isn't your classroom on the 3rd floor? Yes. Songge said, my parents are police officers. I have learned a lot of basic training programs and self-defense skills since I was a child. I didn't understand it when I was a child. But when I grew up, I practiced blindly according to my memory. And I also achieved some results. So I succeeded in rappelling. Lu Yao asked anxiously, what about our Yu? Songge has the basics. No problem, but their daughter has never had any physical training, let alone the 3rd floor. It's hard for her to hold the curtains. Songge, of course she jumped. Lu Yao was really unbelievable, turned to look at her daughter. Yu, did you really jump? Tong Xiangyu nodded. Because Songge was waiting for me downstairs. Songge turned to look at Tong Xiangyu. Xiangyu asked me to save the others in the class, but I didn't agree. Tong Xiangyu leaned back gently, lowered her eyes, and said, the situation was really dangerous at that time. I just thought that if Songge could help. There were so many students in the classroom, and helping one more person could save one. But Songge refused. Songge, do you know why I refused? Tong Xiangyu, because it's very dangerous. Songge, yeah. Although we are classmates, we are not friends. I don't want to risk my life for them. Lu Yao, but you brought our Yu. Songge did not respond, but continued to speak. The school fell quickly. I found a bicycle to take her back to my house. We stayed there for a few days without rescue, and we were almost out of food and clothing. So I decided to take her out. Songge said, at that time, the streets were littered with corpses, blood, rotten meat, and man-eating monsters paraded all over the streets. Tong Xiangyu thought about it and frowned. I fell down when I escaped that day. Lu Yao was nervous. Songge, we haven't seen the sun in the basement for too long. So when we go out, we covered our eyes with black cloth to protect our eyes. But this affected our vision. And the noise we made accidentally attracted the attention of the monsters. Tong Xiangyu said to Songge, if you hadn't attracted all the monsters away, I would have died. Songge did not comment. Lu Yao was frightened. But when she heard Songge detailed account of these things, she didn't quite understand his intention. Because looking at Songge's state, he didn't seem to be trying to repay her kindness. Instead, it seemed like something was being prepared. Lu Yao felt uneasy for some reason, and glanced at her husband. Tong Yulin asked, what happened next? Tong Xiangyu, Songge escaped from the danger, and we stayed at a grandmother's house for half a month, and then, Songge said he would take me out of the city to find you. Songge, yes. Lu Yao invited Songge to eat, and used a serving chopstick to pick up the crispy meat for her. Songge took it, and then turned to Tong Xiangyu and said, do you remember when we were at the stage? Encountered mutated dogs. Tong Xiangyu nodded. Those dogs are more ferocious than mutated humans, and there are hundreds of them. Tong Xiangyu said to her parents, it was Songge who came up with a way to suck all those dogs into a government building, and then burn them all. The situation was really thrilling at that time. Songge, there was also the wildfire in Taiyuan. When I was driving and there was smoke, I saw a lot of rocks on the driveway. When Tong Xiangyu heard Song-gu talk about that, her face turned pale. Obviously, she was thinking of bad memories. Song-gu suddenly stood up. And in front of Lu Yao and Tong Yulin, he lifted his skirt. There was an old, deeply sunken round scar on his abdomen. The steel bar went straight through from the back. Seeing Lu Yao's shocked expression, Song-gu turned to Tong Xiangyu and said, "At the moment of danger, I turned the steering wheel hard towards you." Tong Xiangyu clenched her fists tightly, looking at the scar on Song-gu's abdomen, thinking of that desperate and helpless day. Her face turned pale. Seeing that she looked wrong, Song-gu put down his skirt, held her hand, and comforted her. Then, Song-gu looked at Lu Yao. Lu Yao saw Song-gu holding her daughter's hand. The glances they exchanged, and the emotions in their eyes. Her expression stiffened unconsciously. Song-gu said, "There are many more to come. When the mutant vines attacked, I pushed you away at the first moment, and I got hurt instead." Tong Xiangyu gently pinched Song-gu's fingers and whispered, "So, I said you saved me many times. Without you, I would have died 100 times. Song-gu asked, "Then do you know why I protected you all the way?" Tong Xiangyu shook her head. Song-gu never told her the reason. Tong Xiangyu looked up at Song-gu and asked, "Why?" Song-gu smiled. "At that time, you can't just take advantage of your father being the richest man in Kiching. The whole city is like hell. I said I would take you to find your parents, but who can guarantee that they are still alive? Song-gu, I just take advantage of you." Tong Xiangyu was stunned. Lu Yao and Tong Yulin were also dumbfounded. Song-gu looked at Tong Xiangyu and said, "I have always liked you, so when danger occurs I want to save you. They are not worth my life risking, but for you, I can risk my life." Song-gu, once and again. Tong Xiangyu stared at Song-gu blankly. Song-gu's confession made her heart beat fast, deafening, and for a moment, she almost forgot where she was. Song-gu had been laying the groundwork for a long time, turned to look at Lu Yao and Tong Yulin, and said, "Just now, when I saw the uncle and aunt introducing friends to Xiangyu, I felt very uncomfortable. I should have generously blessed them, because it sounds too strange for girls to be together. But I was unwilling to give up. I had pulled her back from the brink of death time and time again. If I hadn't been lucky, she would have died. So why should I give her to someone else?" Song-gu, uncle and aunt. Is that right? How could Lu Yao say yes? Seeing Song-gu's serious expression when he declared his sovereignty, she, as an elder, was at a loss for a moment. Looking at her daughter, she seemed to have been fascinated. It took Lu Yao a while to come back to her senses. She was a great professor, but she was a little incoherent. "So you are together?" Tong Xiangyu came back to her senses, listening to her heartbeat like a drum, thinking that Song-gu had said in the bedroom that there was no rush to confess. But now he had told her parents, and she was filled with courage, and was about to say yes. But Song-gu said, "No. I just think that, for saving my life, and saving so many times, it shouldn't be too much to ask her to marry him." Tong Yulin didn't want to sell his daughter, although Song-gu did do them a favor. He said, "We can give you other things, such as letting you stay in a safe shelter forever." Song-gu, "Thank you, uncle, but I don't need it. I will soon have a job and a house in the shelter." Tong Yulin was slightly stunned, but still said, "But I do." Tong Xiangyu made a clear position and said loudly, "Mom and Dad, I like Song-gu too. I want to be with her." When Lu Yao heard the 3 words "I do," she remembered the excited words she heard when she was cooking in the kitchen. But it turned out that they were talking about this just now. "But girls and girls, isn't this a joke?" Lu Yao tried to regain her sanity, said, "But you are just good friends." Song-gu, "It's different, Auntie. I wouldn't want to kiss a friend, but I would want to kiss Xiangyu." Lu Yao's expression froze. Song-gu, "If you really can't accept it, you can also think that your daughter and I are just good friends." Lu Yao, I need to think about it." Tong Yulin looked at his daughter, but saw that her cheeks were rosy, and her dark almond eyes were full of happiness, and the emotion was written all over her face. Compare it with the completely perfunctory attitude with Xiaobin. Tong Yulin understood, said, "Let's eat first, the food is getting cold." Song-gu was not stubborn, gave them enough time to accept, and then did not bring up any related topics, and finished dinner quietly. Song-gu was leaving. Tong Xiangyu quickly stood up and said, "I see you off." The two left. Lu Yao did not clean up the room. She held her forehead, had not yet digested what Song-gu said at the dinner table, and could not accept that her daughter was kidnapped by a girl in less than a year. Tong Yulin stood up first, picked up the dishes one by one, and comforted his wife. There are so many boys in the class, but it was Song-gu who sent our daughter back safely. Based on this, Song-gu's ability and sincerity are worthy of recognition. Lu Yao sighed, came to her senses, still frowned. But the two girls. If Song-gu really had bad intentions, he wouldn't have gone through so much trouble to send you back. Tong Yulin, it's because you were anxious to introduce Xiao Bin to you, which irritated her. Lu Yao looked at her husband. What should we do? As long as Yu is happy. Tong Yulin said. I only have this one child left. As long as you two are alive and well, I can do anything. Aren't you afraid of other people's opinions? What are you afraid of? Tong Yulin raised his voice. Don't say this is not catching. Even if it is. Does my daughter Tong Yulin need to look at other people's opinions when she wants to be with someone? Lu Yao looked at her husband's high-spirited look and couldn't help laughing. Tong Yulin saw his wife finally smile. And he smiled, saying, since you want to take Song-gu as your goddaughter, just treat her as an extra daughter. Lu Yao thought. That's all. In fact, if you think about it carefully, you can see the traces of their overly good relationship in all the details. Lu Yao also stood up to clean up the table. While cleaning up, she thought, Yu didn't come back until midnight last night. At first, I thought I heard it wrong. But now it seems that she went to see Song-gu. It still takes time to accept it. But just like her husband said, if Yu really has to be with Song-gu, then her daughter Lu Yao doesn't need to look at anyone's eyes if she wants to be with a girl. Song-gu and Tong Xiangyu, who left, didn't know the tangled mental journey of the two elders. They held hands and walked slowly under the streetlights. A gust of cold wind blew in their faces. Song-gu took off his coat and put it on Tong Xiangyu. Tong Xiangyu obediently let Song-gu button her clothes, looking up. You won't be cold. Right? Song-gu smiled, looking at her. I'm not afraid of the cold. Did you forget? Tong Xiangyu smiled with her eyes curved. Song-gu, so happy? Tong Xiangyu asked, why did you suddenly change your mind, and tell my parents again? Song-gu, because I don't want your parents to introduce you to more excellent friends. I can't compete with them. TSK, they are not excellent. In my eyes, there are only two kinds of people in this world. Which two kinds? One is called Song-gu, that's my girlfriend. The rest are all called others. Song-gu was amused, looking at Tong Xiangyu. Is your mouth smeared with honey? Tong Xiangyu's pretty face was beaming with joy, smug. It's okay. It's okay, I can praise you every day, provide you with emotional value, let you know the benefits of having a girlfriend with high emotional intelligence, and make you like me more and more. Song-gu lowered his head and kissed her. You don't need to provide emotional value, I like you more and more. You put honey on your mouth too? Come and taste it, there is honey in my mouth. Wow! Song-gu. Tong Xiangyu smiled, and put her arms around Song-gu's neck, and half pushed Song-gu under the lamp post. The bright light illuminated the night. The figures of the two were elongated, in the half-light and half-darkness, embracing each other tightly, and receiving the most passionate and gentle kiss in the world. End of text. Chapter 125 Extra. With his powerful superpowers, Song-gu has repeatedly made meritorious contributions, and has been promoted quickly. In less than 2 years, he has become the captain of the second advanced team. The ground city has been completely occupied by superpowered plants and animals. Even if humans have superpowers, and carry a large number of modified thermal weapons, they can only kill a part of them. Because the other side is endless, and reproduces very quickly. Just like humans can't eliminate all locusts and rats, these superpowered plants and animals are more difficult to deal with than rats and locusts. First, there are a lot of them. And second, they are very aggressive, and have a high attack power. However, it was not all bad news. With the efficiency of the advanced team, survivors were found all over the country. The underground city of the shelter, where they lived, was also developed larger and larger. Song-gu joined the mobile team, and Tong Xiangyu worked with her mother in the medical research team to develop drugs, special medicines, and vaccines to deal with abnormal plants. Tong Xiangyu was smart and studious. She worked during the day and read at night. She absorbed knowledge quickly, and applied what she learned. She also had the ability of self-healing, which helped the research team break through many bottlenecks. Of course, she never told anyone about her blood's ability to heal wounds and detoxify. Even after living in the shelter for 2 years, she only decomposed her blood. extracted it one by one, and then analyzed it for use in medicine. Although the results were not rapid, it was much better than the bottleneck before. At least there was new progress every day. Although there were many people in the shelter, compared with the critical situation on the ground, there was still a shortage of personnel. Those who are capable should work harder. Song-gu was on duty outside for more than 20 days a month. So whenever Song-gu came back, Tong Seong-yu would always get off work on time and go home early to cook some meals. When Liu Yao saw her daughter getting off work on time, she knew what was going on. Song-gu is back? I wanted you to go to mom's house for dinner. Tong Seong-yu took off her white coat and hung it up, and said with a smile, tomorrow? I will take Song-gu to mom's house for dinner. Liu Yao also smiled. Okay. I asked your dad to buy more vegetables. When she was leaving the building, Tong Seong-yu met several people from the research institute, who politely called her Sister Seoyu. After Tong Seong-yu entered the institute, her research results made rapid progress. Although she was young, everyone respected her. At first, Tong Seong-yu was polite and asked them not to call her that. Later, she got used to it and just smiled and let them do it. Tong Seong-yu bought several dishes and went home to wash her hands and cook soup. The sky gradually darkened. The food was almost ready, but Song-gu had not returned yet. Tong Seong-yu made a soup in the pot, set a time, and went to the bathroom to take a bath. The hot water washed away her fatigue. Tong Seong-yu picked and chose among several skirts, and finally chose a blue backless dress, and then put on a windbreaker. However, the soup was ready, but Song-gu still hadn't come back. Tong Seong-yu lowered her head and bit her finger, took out her phone to send a message to Song-gu. But the message fell on deaf ears. Tong Seong-yu became even more uneasy. Logically, if any member of the advance team was injured, the family would be notified immediately. When Song-gu first started the mission, he was slightly injured twice while saving his teammates. At that time, Tong Seong-yu was angry and worried, and cried twice. Song-gu was scared by her crying, and quickly promised that he would always put his own safety first in the future. After making the promise, Song-gu never got hurt again. Then tonight, before he could finish his thought, there was a knock on the door. Did Song-gu not bring his key? Tong Seong-yu hurried to open the door, but found that it was not Song-gu, but a member of Song-gu team. Sister Seoyu, the soldier shouted. Tong Seong-yu did not see Song-gu, and her heart skipped a beat. What's wrong? Where's Song-gu? Captain Song is having a dinner party. The soldier smiled and said happily, this time we captured several mutant leopards alive. Good guys, each of them is more than 2 meters tall, and we have 1 first-class merit. Everyone is happy. We invited Captain Song to a dinner party to celebrate. Captain Song missed you, and insisted on coming back to eat, but everyone snatched her phone away, so I thought, I came to tell you. Sister Seoyu, so you don't have to worry. Tong Seong-yu laughed angrily. Did you tie up Song-gu? The soldier touched his nose. You can't say that. Captain Song always skips the celebration banquet, and what about the first-class merit this time? Tong Seong-yu knew that Song-gu would always skip the dinner party with the team members, but this was not conducive to the unity with the team members. Although it was a pity to waste the dishes I made. However, it was a rare opportunity. Tong Seong-yu said, Captain Song doesn't drink well, you should watch her. Don't let anyone get her drunk. After thinking for a while, he said, forget it, where are you guys having dinner? Song-gu doesn't drink well, but he delayed getting drunk. This mission was planned for half a month, because we encountered a group of mutant leopards. It was delayed for 4 days, although the result was good, but she didn't see Tong Seong-yu for almost 20 days. I was almost going crazy thinking about it. On the way back, I couldn't help having a sweet dream, holding my sweet girlfriend, without even having time to eat, holding her and pressing her on the dining table, kissing and touching her to my heart's content. When I woke up, I was carried to the club by several guys in the team, and they were yelling that they must have a dinner party to celebrate the victory. After 3 rounds of drinking, Song-gu was a little dizzy, because his hearing and vision were originally sharp, and when he was drunk, the impact was even greater, and he felt a little dizzy. But as the captain, he couldn't lose his dignity. So Song-gu was still sitting upright, listening to everyone talking about what they had done when they were hunting live poultry leopards. Song-gu listened lazily, until a slender and graceful figure appeared in her blurred vision. Just looking at her, she was the type she liked. Little milk tea? Song-gu squinted to confirm. Sister-in-law? Someone heard Song-gu calling her, followed her gaze, and said, Why is sister-in-law here? Captain Song. You are wrong. That is not her. Song-gu rubbed his temple. And sure enough, the figure in the blue skirt was a strange girl in a blue uniform. No more drinking. I'm going back. Song-gu stood up. Wait. The scene hasn't changed yet. In everyone's opinion, Song-gu is very capable. Although she is a woman, she is heroic and decisive. She is more capable than them. So they all admire her from the bottom of their hearts. Of course, she must be able to drink well. After all, Captain Song once boasted to them that she could drink a lot. Even Xiaoyu's sister-in-law. She chased after her after drinking. Drink more? Captain Song, you have made the greatest contribution this time. Song-gu couldn't resist being drunk by everyone. Mainly, she remembered what Tong Xiangyu said, work is work, and you can't be too low in EQ and spoil the fun in your spare time. So she drank 2 more glasses reluctantly. When she stood up, she was still standing steadily. Everyone saw that she was fine, and then looked at the pile of wine bottles on the table, and praised Captain Song for his good alcohol tolerance. Song-gu didn't take their compliments to heart, and said, you guys eat, I'll be back later. Song-gu pretended to take 2 steps to the bathroom, and then turned outside, but she ran into a blue figure head-on. It seems like the one just now. Song-gu didn't even say sorry, and tried to go around, but the man moved his feet slightly and blocked Song-gu. Song-gu? Drunk? No. Song-gu heard her voice sounded familiar, squinted. It was Tong Xiangyu, but then he remembered that the team member said Tong Xiangyu would not come, so he thought he was seeing things again, and said, make way. Ask your girlfriend to make way? Girlfriend? Song-gu paused for a moment, and said, yes, my girlfriend is waiting for me at home. Tong Xiangyu. Tong Xiangyu saw Song-gu red cheeks. Although he was standing straight, he was obviously drunk. There were still many people in the club, and they all looked over here. Tong Xiangyu reached out to pull Song-gu. Song-gu was a man of integrity, and immediately stepped back. Don't touch me. Tong Xiangyu. Tong Xiangyu thought to herself. Okay. Song-gu. You see if I will let you drink in the future. But seeing that Song-gu was not going to listen, Tong Xiangyu simply said, I won't touch you. I will take you home. No, I know the way. You know nothing. Tong Xiangyu laughed angrily. You don't even recognize your girlfriend. How can you recognize the way home? Song-gu raised her index finger again, and poked the shoulder of the girl in front of her, who looked very similar to her girlfriend. Don't chat with me. Tong Xiangyu. Tong Xiangyu was a little annoyed when she saw Song-gu like this, but suddenly she became interested. You have a girlfriend? Where is she? Song-gu, at home. At home? That means they didn't know you were outside. They say that flowers at home are not as beautiful as wild flowers. How about, let's make an appointment? No appointment. Why? Tong Xiangyu blocked Song-gu away. Am I not pretty? Song-gu narrowed her eyes, and approached Tong Xiangyu. No matter how she looked at her, she was still Tong Xiangyu. She shook her head. No. You are not as pretty as my girlfriend. Tong Xiangyu thought to herself. Song-gu. You are really promising. You can tell who is prettier among the same people. You said, I am not pretty. But I have a good figure. After saying that, Tong Xiangyu grabbed Song-gu's hand and pressed it against her waist. Song-gu was shocked and retracted her hand. However, the vines were more honest than her. They pulled out very happily and wrapped around Tong Xiangyu without caring about the occasion. Song-gu was caught off guard and hurriedly grabbed the vines that were overly enthusiastic towards a stranger. What are you doing? Song-gu scolded. Don't mess around. Tong Xiangyu touched the vines, grabbed the drunk Song-gu and led him to a dark place in the club, and put Song-gu's hand on her buttocks, and blew a breath in her ear. Does your girlfriend have a perkier butt than mine? Song-gu smelled the familiar scent on Tong Xiangyu's body, and he became more and more drunk, and his clear mind gradually faded. Song-gu rubbed the top of Tong Xiangyu's head intimately, and whispered, Little milk tea. I'm not little milk tea. Tong Xiangyu pretended to be surprised. Is that your girlfriend? So your girlfriend is milk tea. Song-gu muttered, probably figuring out something from this sentence, and forced himself to stand up and leave the person in front of him. But his hands seemed to have self-awareness like vines, and rubbed and pinched Tong Xiangyu's buttocks. Although it was in the dark of the club, it was in public after all. Tong Xiangyu was shy, and she pushed Song-gu. You don't want your girlfriend anymore? You want me? A wild flower. Then tell me, who is prettier? Me or your girlfriend? Song-gu was hit on the hand by her, and his thoughts became more confused. Looking at Tong Seong-yu in front of him, he felt a little wronged. Wife, I miss you. Tong Seong-yu couldn't bear to hear Song-gu's aggrieved voice. She was angry that she had no sense of propriety and got drunk outside, and didn't recognize herself. After hearing this, all her anger disappeared, and only the longing after a long separation remained. Tong Seong-yu raised her hand and hooked it around Song-gu's neck, humming and kissing her for a while. Tong Seong-yu's breathing was a little breathless, and her legs were slightly weak. There seems to be a room upstairs in the club. Let's go back after we're done. This time, Song-gu looked at Tong Seong-yu and answered confidently. Okay. Song-gu was drunk, but he walked more steadily than Tong Seong-yu, who was not drunk. Song-gu held her, asked the waiter for directions, and then took the elevator. As soon as he swiped his card to check in, several vines couldn't wait to lift Tong Seong-yu's skirt. Song-gu sniffed the pleasant scent of the other person after the shower, and hooked his fingers under the lace fabric. Tong Seong-yu's waist trembled, and she gasped. Song-gu. Light. Light. The room card was not inserted, and the lights in the room were not turned on. But Song-gu's vision was not hindered at all. He pinched the soft skin under his hand and was busy with his own things. Tong Seong-yu wanted Song-gu to stay away, but she couldn't say a complete sentence. Before she was awake, Song-gu's movements were very gentle, and she had never seen such eagerness and urgency. Tong Seong-yu vaguely smelled the strong smell of alcohol, and her heart was hanging in her throat in the darkness. After Song-gu was satisfied with his wantonness, he was contented, picked her up, and put her on the bed. Tong Seong-yu was even slightly startled. Oh! Song-gu. The long black hair spread on the bed like a waterfall. Song-gu pressed on Tong Seong-yu, sniffed like a puppy. This is his little milk tea, and contentedly nestled into the thin neck and rubbed it a few times. Song-gu, wife! Tong Seong-yu raised her hand and gently stroked Song-gu's head. I miss you so much. Song-gu nudged Tong Seong-yu's neck again, acting like a drunken spoiled child, and then hugged Tong Seong-yu tightly with his hands and feet, and fell asleep. It was like a giant dragon curling up its tail, guarding its own treasure tightly. Tong Seong-yu sighed softly in the dark. Oh, I'm a little hungry. Not physically hungry. It's hungry in the stomach. I can't go to my mother's house for dinner tomorrow. Song-gu has to go back and accompany her to heat up the cold rice and cold dishes and eat them. This is a punishment. Dare to drink. Song-gu woke up in the middle of the night. She remembered that she was stopped by a girl in a blue skirt. She even mistook her for Tong Seong-yu. After being stopped, they had sex. Song-gu was terrified. Before she opened her eyes, she felt like the sky was falling, because she could clearly feel someone in her arms, and this bed was obviously not the one in their bedroom. It was over. Drinking made things worse. Song-gu was struck by lightning. Her brain, which was tingling after a hangover, was working slowly. She immediately let go of her hand and sat up. In his mind, he recalled Tong Seong-yu breaking up with him, and how he cried and tried to keep her. Song-gu was about to find his clothes, but heard a mutter behind him. Song-gu? Song-gu stopped all his movements and turned his head stiffly. Tong Seong-yu was half asleep and half awake, and her voice was confused and delicate. What's wrong? Song-gu. Damn. I was scared. Fortunately, it was just a nightmare. Song-gu quickly threw away his clothes, laid down again, and hugged Tong Seong-yu in his arms. Wife. Tong Seong-yu said sleepily. Wife. Little milk tea. Baby. Tong Seong-yu heard her shout so many things, and knew what Song-gu wanted to do. She subconsciously said coquettishly, Don't do it. I'm so hungry. Don't do it. I go home and cook for you. Song-gu kissed Tong Seong-yu several times, and his fingers couldn't let go of her. But thinking about what the other party said, he didn't do it seriously, but took the skirt to help Tong Seong-yu put it on. It was like being reborn. Song-gu carried Tong Seong-yu home from the club in the middle of the night. On the way, he was relieved and scared, thinking secretly, I will never drink a drop of alcohol again in this life. Chapter 126 Extra. 10 years have passed since the outbreak of the zombie virus, and the frequent natural disasters, and the plants and animals mutated due to the influence of radiation. After 10 years of unremitting efforts and struggles, humanity finally returned to the surface from underground. With the capital as the center, several cities around it were completely cleared, and the country used satellites to establish a security defense network, and the high-frequency sound waves emitted could spontaneously resist the approach of mutant plants and animals. And the newly developed ammunition can also eliminate most of the mutants. Medical treatment has also caught up with the efficiency. No longer have to worry about being injured by mutated plants and animals, and then mutating and dying. Everything is slowly getting better. Song-gu is already a lieutenant colonel. After moving to the ground, she applied to the chief for a small hill, built a house halfway up the hill, and opened up several plots of land. As the superpower team gradually expands, military hot weapons are improved, there are more and more ways to resist mutants, and she doesn't have to be on the front line all the time. If the weather is good, she will take Tong Xiangyu to live in the mountains for 2 days. Song-gu brought the water up himself. After bringing it up, Tong Xiangyu was responsible for scooping water to water the vegetables. In the underground shelter before, they ate vegetables grown in greenhouses, all artificially raised. Now that the above-ground city is open, the land, the hills, fruits and vegetables have the bonus of nature, of course. More nutritious. But, Song-gu, this tomato just licked me. Which one? Song-gu came out of the house immediately. Tong Xiangyu pointed to the tomato and small leaves that had just produced green fruits at hand. Song-gu raised his hand, and a vine flew out quickly, directly rolled down the small fruit, and threw it high. Bye-bye. Who was already more than 1 meter tall standing at the edge of the field. Took off, bit the unripe tomato accurately, rolled his tongue, and disappeared. Song-gu walked into the field, and saw that several red tomatoes had turned green. Song-gu, which of you is brave enough to lick it? Several tomatoes trembled, quietly gathered their leaves to hide themselves, to avoid being killed by Song-gu. No more. No more. Tong Xiangyu stood on tiptoe and kissed Song-gu on the face, said, Song-gu, I think we should plant more cabbage, what do you think? Professor Qian said that it was delicious before. Song-gu, no more cabbage. It's dangerous. Not really, it's just a little more spoiled than Chinese cabbage. Tong Xiangyu said, it has been artificially grafted, and the seeds have been treated with drugs. This mutant has been safe for a long time. At most, it likes to contact people, but it won't hurt people. Song-gu, then I buy 2 packets of seeds later. How about this eggplant? It seems to be planted normally. I haven't seen it move. Eggplant, who dares to move it? I don't dare. When Song-gu is at home, Song-gu is the one who cooks. She cooks much better than Tong-yu. After all, she often goes to Lu Yao to learn from her. Especially when work is not busy, after humans move back to the ground. But Tong Xiangyu always wants to fight for the opportunity to show off. When Tong Xiangyu calls for dinner, the person in charge of monitoring in the yard, the vines of all the crops in the farmland would return to the house in a flash. And Bai Bai also ran into the house at lightning speed. However, after seeing the dishes on the table, the vines hesitated for a moment and quietly slipped out. Bai Bai also ran out as if he had run into the wrong place. Tong Xiangyu. Tong Xiangyu had not put down the teriyaki eggplant in her hand, and she shouted aggrievedly, Song-gu. And Bai Bai bullied me. Song-gu grabbed 2 handfuls of wild fruits that he had just picked from the back mountain, and strode into the house. Who dares to bully you? Tong Xiangyu complained, Bai Bai and didn't eat the food I cooked. They ran away. She pointed to the door. Song-gu looked over. Tong Xiangyu saw that Song-gu didn't say anything. So she turned around, and saw that the vine with a bunch of pink flowers was already on the dining table. Bai Bai was squatting beside it with his front paws raised and his long tongue sticking out, looking very obedient. He didn't look like he ran away in a hurry just now. Tong Xiangyu, don't be angry anymore. Song-gu picked the reddest wild fruit and handed it to Tong Xiangyu. Try it, and see if it tastes the same as before. It's a fruit that was harvested this year, and is not a mutant. Song-gu tasted it himself, and it tasted okay. Very refreshing. Tong Xiangyu took it and took a bite, and her pretty face wrinkled instantly. Wow! So sour. Then don't eat it. And ask Lao Chun to come over and graft it later. After all, it's wild, and it may taste a bit rebellious. Song-gu stretched out his hand. Tong Xiangyu wanted to eat the one in her mouth, but seeing Song-gu like this, she lowered her head and spit it into Song-gu's hand. Song-gu threw it into the trash can, and then pulled 2 handfuls of fruit from the branches. One to Bai Bai, and one to the vine. Song-gu, don't waste it, they have worked so hard to grow it. A vine and a dog dared not speak, eating sour red fruits, One twisted the city twisted dough sticks, the other sneezed because it was so sour. Song-gu always supported the food made by Tong Xiangyu, and would eat it all. The two stayed in the mountains for a few days. In the morning, they were awakened by the crisp and lively bird calls. The mountain breeze was fresh, the morning dew was moist. At noon, they ate vegetables planted by themselves. Song-gu occasionally hunted 2 wild game that had been artificially modified and released back into the mountains. Xian Jufu. At night, they sit on the reclining chair in the yard and watch the stars and the moon. Tong Xiangyu nestles in Song-gu arms. Beside them, Tung Man and Bai Bai play with each other. The wind blows over. The thrilling, displaced, and trekking memories seem so long ago now. Tong Xiangyu rubbed her cheek against Song-gu arms, and suddenly said, Song-gu, do you remember when you came out to my parents? You said you saved me because you love me? Song-gu lowered his head, kisses her on the forehead, smiles and replies, yeah, of course I remember. Tong Xiangyu supported herself in Song-gu arms, and began to recount the events. You saved me later. Maybe because you fell in love with me. But you saved me at the beginning. It couldn't be because of this. Right? Song-gu raised his eyebrows slightly and said, why not? You are so beautiful. Tong Xiangyu was very reasonable. I have always been beautiful. But you didn't say a few words to me because of this before. Song-gu smiled with a salty look, and then pretended to be serious. Is this important? It's not very important. Tong Xiangyu leaned back on Song-gu again, feeling the slight vibration of Song-gu's chest when he spoke, and said, I'm just a little curious. After all, there were so many people in the class at that time, and Song-gu didn't look at anyone twice. Song-gu looked around, and the night was as dark as before, but there were many bright and shining stars twinkling. Maybe it's because you gave me a small cake that morning? Even though everyone in the class had one. Tong Xiangyu was in Song-gu's arms, and was slightly stunned when she heard this. It took her a long time to remember that there was such a thing. She felt a little incredible, and then she held back her laughter. Why? From your tone, it seems that you are still a little aggrieved? Song-gu cleared his throat. No. Don't feel wronged. Tong Xiangyu looked up, and all she could see was Song-gu's reflection. She smiled and said, actually, it wasn't anyone's birthday that day. I saw your breakfast was trampled on the bus. So I asked the driver to have a cake made at home and sent it over. I was afraid that if I gave it to you alone, you might not want it. So I asked him to prepare more, so that everyone in the class could have one. Song-gu was stunned. Tong Xiangyu couldn't help laughing. Her curved almond eyes were as bright and beautiful as they had been for 10 years. Stupid. So why don't you come and kiss me? Song-gu finally reacted, and smiled softly. She lowered her head and kissed Tong Xiangyu deeply. Her lips and tongues entangled as intimately as before, and she heard an almost inaudible thank you. Thank you. You are so kind. Thank you for being willing to come into my once dark life.